Chapter 46:66. As the dojo transformed from supreme grievances swept over, Jian Wushuang waved his hand directly in the air to stroke it. The intangible and intangible avenue rule centered on him, sheltering everyone. Looking into the eyes, I only felt that the heavens and the earth fell into the extreme darkness. The mud tire was the pinnacle of the universe, and the ancestral aura could even be resisted by Jian Wushuang. Located at the very center of the evil dojo, the mud tire smiled sullenly, and under the wave of his palm, the void broke into the abyss of heaven, while countless horror and strange souls struggled from within, sending out painful and hysterical crying. The shocking magic sound shouted at the moment. The jackdaw and the young man were lost directly, and blood was pouring from their mouths and noses, and it was almost dead. The scepter in the hand of Lao Zun gave a light meal, and the Blackwater enchantment wrapped the two of them, and then pushed away from the fighting range. The innumerable souls are all mud tires who madly engulfed monks in this million years. Their uncomfortable resentment and the power of terror, even the swordsmen, had to keep their hearts on the platform to avoid being eroded by the magic sound. Tai Luo Excalibur started, but then it surprised him. The tyranny of the Tai Luo Jianjin fetus was unexpectedly released, and he may bite the master at any time. Sword Wushuang frowned slightly and put the Tai Luo Excalibur in the sheath, and then called out the invisible sword. The invisible sword is formed by the purest sword intention after he mastered Wushuang Kendo. Xingahouhai sword intention is one of the Taiji Excalibur, one of the ancestors of Lianji Dao. No matter how fit or pure it is, it can no longer be compared with it. In a certain way, the invisible sword is also the ancestor, and it belongs to the ancestors of Jian Wushuang only. Started with the invisible sword, Jian Wushuang did not stay at all and directly released the first form of Xingahouhai Jianyani. Star. The majestic view, the rules of the avenue are condensed in this sword, and it is turned into the sword of Chongshao. At the same time, a tremendous pair of treasures appeared in the back of Jian Wushuang, and he also wielded the heaviest sword. The evil dojo collapsed in an instant, and the countless souls rushing out of the fissures of the heavens only came out and uttered a scream, and they all vanished in the vast sword. Hundreds of thousands of pillars rose up, completely crushing the layout of cheating mud tires. Under this contrast, even the big sun hanging above the star field faintly fell. The cheating mud tire has a deep and evil gaze, and a large array of compasses with cipher texts appears quietly, besieging Muzu Muzu and Lao Zun at the same time. Turn it into my nourishment. I promise to take you to find that arrogant realm. He opened his arms and looked at Jian Wushuang intoxicated. Jian Wushuang did not speak. He felt that the large array of compasses under his feet was constantly weakening the divine power. Immediately after the next moment, from that compass array suddenly rushed out countless grievance ghost hands and madly dragged towards the two. Lingheng's sword Wushuang was about to take the shot, but Lao Zun took his first step, and the black water scepter suddenly stopped. The unique power beyond the level of divine power spreads like ripples in the waves, and the newly raised ghost hand directly perishes. Even with the grotesque compass array, there were numerous cracks. At the same time, Jian Wushuang stepped out in one step with a steady momentum, held up the invisible sword in his hand, and threw it straight at the cheating mud tire. The brilliant divine power punctured the ancient darkness and hit him in the heart. There was extremely bright light flashing, and the cheating mud tire, which was almost cut into two sections by the invisible sword, stood blankly as if it had not yet reacted. At the next moment, the void twisted rapidly, the mud tire smiled strangely, and the almost chopped body recovered instantly, leaving no trace of trauma. Jian Wushuang's heart sank. In a million years, He has grown to such a degree? Still with arms wide open, Chi Ting Mud Tire smiled, sullenly. I am Dedeo, who can kill? Just after his words just fell, a scepter, like a pillar of Optimus, was directed at him and fell down. Only heard the sound of bang. The left half of Cheating Mud Tire was directly broken. An ancestor-level power surge that could not suppress the crazy spout. He groaned loudly, covering the torn wound hard. Jian Wuwei exposed the sarcasm. Just dare you dare to call Dedeo? Are you afraid of this newspaper? Reluctantly to stop the energy released in the body, the Cheating Mud Tire has already weakened to another level, looked at him bitterly, and Kiting's Mud Tire turned around directly, turning into thousands of faint lights scattered in the void. "Wanna go?" Jian Wushuang sneered, reaching out in the void. For a while, when the rule of the road collapsed, and the mud tires that turned into scattered light were directly caught by the rules of these avenues and could not move at all. "No, you can't kill me." Perhaps it was a premonition that he was facing the great horror of life and death, and Kiting's mud tires were terrified. "I am the incarnation of the rules of the Dedeo. No one of you can kill me." He continued to yell, using the supreme supernatural power. After compressing it into a dust-sized shape, Jian Wushuang looked at the mud tire struggling between his fingers and was ready to kill. But to his surprise, although the figure of the mud tire was easily twisted out, but after a while it reunited again, which is extremely erratic. "He has surpassed the rules of this universe. You can't kill him," Lao Zun said calmly. Jian Wushuang also understood it when he thought about it, no longer insisted on killing the mud tires, and then extracted his source to seal it up. After doing all of this, he took a breath. Before the disappearance of the Cheating Mud Tire, he became a heart disease for millions of years. After being suppressed, everything finally returned to the right track. This is finally completely settled down. Jian Wushuang slightly sighed. "What is the next step?" Lao Zun asked. Sword Muzu replied. "Return to Yunshao Palace, after finishing some things, lead the army into the virtual universe, and destroy it completely." Lao Zun nodded and did not speak again. Using the power of the avenue, Jian Wushuang waved his hands back to restore the star field that was destroyed by the battle. The spring grass was resurrected, the refuge water was surging again, and all creatures were bred in the meantime. However, the countless monks who were trapped by the Cheating Mud Tires could not be resurrected. With the rebirth of everything, countless corpses gradually turned into a cup of flying sand. Feeling a tingling pain from his body, the young monk comatose on the coffin board woke up from the coma. "What's going on? I remember this place has not been destroyed yet." Looking at the grassy ground, the young monk murmured, but soon his eyes turned to himself, and he could not help but exclaim. Saw that his entire body escaped countless white mans. Chapter 46, 67. As if it was about to collapse, the divine power that filled the body slowly scattered in the air. "Here, what's going on?" He was a little flustered, but found that he couldn't even do the simplest turn. After seeing this scene, the jackdaw, who was also awake on the side, also flashed a bit of sadness in her eyes. How could she not understand what was happening at the moment, who was extremely sensitive to death? Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun descended to the ground and walked slowly to him, leaned against the coffin, and half of the young monk's figure had turned into a bit of white mango dissipated. "Am I already dead?" He raised his head a little bit hard and looked at the godlike man in front of him. Jian Wushuang's eyes were dim, and he nodded slowly. As long ago, when they first came into contact, Jian Wushuang already realized that the young monk had no spirit of life. Perhaps it was because of the Cheating Mud Tires that he retained his wisdom and exists as a dead body to this day. Now that the cheating mud tires are confined by Jian Wushuang, the source of power that naturally maintains his body has disappeared. Recovering from the initial panic, the young monk said lightly, "So I have already been like them. I thought I was the only survivor, but okay, it was boring for hundreds of thousands of years a night." After saying this sentence, the body of the young monk finally turned into a bunch of white mans. Jian Wushuang reached up and picked up the white mango, rubbed it into an extremely bright star, and then embellished the sky. "Let's go. Everything here will be left to future generations." Jian Wushuang smiled, and the three figures finally disappeared. Originally expected the task of 1,000,000 years, completed 800,000 years in advance, Jian Wushuang and others returned on this journey and rushed back to the Yunshao Palace. In this way, at the end of the 300,000th year, Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun finally returned to Yunshao Palace, and the taciturn, who saw Jian Wushuang as the whole girl of Jackdaw, has long lived on a certain day in more than 200,000 years. For high-level monks, 200,000 years is just a time of retreat, but the poor polar universe, everything in the world, the mortal world with sparse power, the pawns who CANT practice, and the slightly strange feelings are the foundation. 200,000 years. It was already the most wonderful and long life for the Jackdaw girl. Looking at the giant palace as calm as hundreds of thousands of years, Jian Wushuang smiled slightly and entered the Yunshao Palace. Guarding outside the Yunshao Palace, the two descendants of the dragon clan shrugged and continued to sleep. Jian Wushuang's return did not cause much shock because there were not many people in the entire Yunshao Palace. Lan Lan, Bawang, and others have been stationed in the ancient Shinkong Road, and few have returned to the Yunshao Palace. Blood Sovereign led more than 100,000 supreme sovereigns to defend the battlefield outside the territory, stationed on the way to Tianmen. As for the Dragon and Phoenix clan, they have also returned to their respective star fields, leaving only more than 100 clan neutrons stationed in the Yunshao Palace. The years passed, and the new moon replaced Yangchun. Has passed for 500,000 years. On top of the cloud, Jian Wushuang happily held a jade fishing rod and was fishing in the sea of clouds. Is beside him, accompanied by Lao Zun, Yang, and, of course, Fengqi. The little fish transformed by the divine power is tumbling in the sea of clouds. Whenever it comes to eating a hook, Jian Wushuang raises the rod to prevent the fish from touching it. I said, "Jian Wushuang, you guys are all bored. We have been fishing for more than 100,000 years, and we haven't caught a single fish." Feng Qi on the side was full of black lines, and his voice was angry. Fishing is a matter of great consideration for patience and physical strength. I only wanted to catch a fish in 100,000 years. Let's talk about fishing for another 100,000 years. Jian Wushuang is serious. Shook his head slightly. Feng Qi no longer complained, but also caught some kind of fishing. Has been fishing in the Sea of Clouds for 500,000 years, which is also the most wanton time for everyone. No one will know what will happen next, not even the sword Wushuang standing at the top of the universe. In the following time, Bloodwave Supreme and others who were stationed outside the battlefield began to return to the Yunshao Palace one after another. Is waiting for them. It is the first time that the divine universe has reopened the heavenly gate after the catastrophe. Every 100,000 years, there will be a lot of geniuses in the original Shinkong ancient road, but only by going through the path of the heavenly gate, it is possible to eventually reach the Yunshao Palace and become a disciple of eternal God. The way to the heavenly gate is another way of trial that Jian Wushuang started after achieving the ancestor God. If you want to enter it, you must first pass the examination of the ancient Shinkong Road. Everyone is faintly looking forward and can be recognized by nearly 20 invincible supremes and a half-ancestral superpower. What kind of amazing talents will it be? But the special existence like Jian Wushuang that has surpassed genius and is no longer within the scope of consideration. 1 million years ago, on that day, the bell was ringing in the morning, and Zion Yinho was ringing for 9 days and 10 places. Everything is proceeding in an orderly manner. The giants of all parties gathered in Yunshao Palace. Jian Wushuang sat in front of Yunshao Palace. He was obviously looking forward to something, looking into the distance with a smile. Under the haze of cloud smoke, the 9 Tribulation King, who attacked by Shengsheng, Shui walked slowly in front of Yunshao Palace. Behind him were more than 20 invincible supreme. Back to Eternal God, Geo Tribune, and others are fortunate not to lose their lives. The King of 9 Tribulation arched all the hands. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, reached out, and waved Huamang. "I'm bothering you." Covered by the supreme Huamang, the 9 Tribulation King, and others only felt that the fatigue in the god's body was all dissipated and the divine power was full. Then, at the end of the square, 6 slightly immature figures appeared in everyone's eyes. Facing the supreme true dragon on the 2 sides of the pillars, these 6 bodies did not have the slightest timidity and walked steadily. At the forefront of these 6 bodies, there is a handsome young man dressed in a green shirt and with picturesque eyes. There was no flinching in his eyes, but only calmness. At the same time, he also didn't understand in his heart. When he came to the most mysterious and belongs to the Yunshao Palace, which is the pinnacle of the entire universe, why didn't he feel the strangeness and fear in the slightest sense, but had a strange sense of familiarity? Get rid of the unrealistic thoughts of the alarm clock, and the young man in the blue shirt gradually accelerated his pace. Recalling what he had experienced on the way to that vast and terrifying heavenly gate, the other 5 at the same time shivered without a trace, and also stepped forward quickly. Few people at Yunshao Palace were present. How did the people who passed the examination of the heavenly gate pass through? But they knew that the appreciation of the supreme people who participated in the Battle of Havoc was already enough to stand up to 99 of the geniuses of the divine power universe. Chapter 46, 68. Long walk to the Cloud Palace. The young man in the blue shirt finally felt the inexplicable tension from the bottom of his heart. Almost full-bodied, the condensed divine power was breathless, and the endless supreme supremacy seemed like an insurmountable mountain-high mountain, breathtaking. At the same time, they saw that there was such an almost unimaginable existence that was terrifying in the Tianmen, this 00 reading book 00 KXS, engraved actually has digits. And in the most central part of those horrible beings, there is a man in a white Chinese suit with a handsome face and a prestigious temperament. The atmosphere was extremely tense, and cold sweat poured out of each of their temples unconsciously. "Are you here?" The white shirt man sitting on the head smiled, his voice falling from 9 days. The young man in the blue shirt finally reacted and hurriedly bowed the salute. "I have seen Eternal God." Jian Wushuang smiled faintly. "Don't be discreet, kids. We should get along for a while. Tell me, when did you practice monasticism, and how did you do it?" The 6 people nodded and promised. The youth in the blue shirt took the lead and said, "Return to the Eternal God, which is called Qingxiu in the next day." More than one. 73 million have been practiced since then. As soon as this statement came out, all the supremes in the Yunshao Palace looked at it with horror. It is a matter of 73 million years to enter the supreme divine realm, which is simply impossible to imagine. It must be understood that this is just a time for enlightenment. Even Feng Qi and Long Yanlong Qi and others were also a little surprised. They all cast their gazes at the kid named Qingxiu. The king of 9 Tribulation is still indifferent. Perhaps it is an unthinkable thing for all the Supreme to achieve the Supreme for more than 1 million years. But for the Nine Tribulation King, who entered the Yunshao Palace with Jian Wushuang millions of years ago, it is obviously not enough. Because of Jian Wushuang's cultivation experience, he has forcibly lifted the King of Nine Tribulation to another level. The year he went straight to the Supreme, even less than 850,000 years. Yes, it's a terrifying arrogance. Jian Wushuang nodded with satisfaction, and then looked at the other five. Although the following five people's spiritual journey did not have the shock from the Qingxiu, it was still an unimaginable existence. Among them, the oldest person who has the most spiritual practice is no more than 30 million years old. It is conceivable that the few arrogants who pass the way of the heavenly gate will definitely be able to grow to the state of invincibility and supremacy in the future, and even the youth in the blue shirt may grow to the state of a half-ancestor. After briefly asking about the practice, Jian Wushuang smiled and asked a question. There are thousands of cosmic avenues. What is your ultimate intention in this practice? The six people looked at each other, but then they talked about it happily. Compared with the ordinary civilians who have a rest in the world, they can reach all things, and they are really more exciting and enthusiastic. But even if it is wonderful and enthusiastic again, in the nearly long years, who will keep the original intention, or have the original intention? 5 answers, 5 seek longevity. Only the young man in the blue shirt had a blank face from beginning to end. He seemed to have set foot on the road of monasticism without any original intention, and everything seemed to be logical until today. Back to eternal God. I don't know. There is stillness in the Yunshao Palace, and all the supreme nods are smiling, silent. Jian Wushuang laughed, and he seemed to be extremely comfortable. After a moment, he looked at the blood waves that accompanied the left and right sides. Zhu Jia and others smiled. Come on, choose your lovers. Promise. Blood wave. Zhu Jia, Feng Qi, Long Yanlong Qi, and others bowed their hands to promise. 5.5 ancestors selected the 5 people corresponding to each other, but no one selected the young Qing shirt. The loss appeared from the bottom of his eyes. Maybe the sentence, I do and T know, let him break the road from now on. Just as he was sad, the dignified voice sounded again. Qingxiu, would you like to be my disciple under my door? Was shocked, and Qingxiu looked up at eternal God in disbelief. At the next moment, he directly knelt and fell to the ground, trembling. The disciple is willing. Jian Wushuang smiled and lifted him up by the wind. No need to be discreet. You are my disciple from now on, then I will give you the word. Everything is subject to master. Qingxiu excitedly said. Look, how about the word Daoyan? Jian Wushuang smiled. Qingxiu chanted several sounds silently, and then he uttered his hands and said, Disciple Daoyan, Xia Shizuan fell. Jian Wushuang didn't speak anymore, and looked at them with a few words of humanity. Sit down, let me discuss some issues with you. At this point, all the Supremes are now heading back, gradually leaving the Yunshao Palace. The beginning of this futon hearing indicates that these 6 people, the future achievements, will definitely not stop at the invincible Supreme. And the young man in the blue shirt, which was written by the of the universe, could not guess where he would go. Looked at the Yunshao Palace, gradually hidden in the top of the cloud. Feng Qi smiled, faintly. It was just over 2 million years. The green lotus that was sent to the lower realm finally grew to the present level 2 million years ago. He was the green lotus next to eternal God. 210,000 years later, he became a disciple who sat down, and everything seemed to have its own number. Feng Qi turned around and pulled the sleeve of the Nine Tribulation King beside him. I said, how does the disciple accepted by Jian Wushuang compare to his talent? Zhu Jia smiled slightly. The sword of Wushuang was more terrible than the little guy at the moment. He was a guy who would make everyone eclipsed in front of him. Looking at the figure of the Nine Tribulation King flew away, Feng Qi shrugged. Yes, it is only the sword that can make such an arrogant guy to say such a thing. Skyrim's cirrus cloud shoe, this futon herd, has lasted for nearly 100 years. The sound of the avenue rises steadily above the cloud top. When the clouds blocking the front of Yunshao Palace gradually disperse, the 6 bodies blessed the heaven and earth avenue and walked out slowly. Everyone, without exception, has become invincible supreme. Their eyes are no longer blank, but have their own beliefs and goals. Since then, the 6 invincible supremacy have all remained in the Yunshao Palace. The blood wavelength is old, the elder giant axe. You are not curious why I put the word Daoyan on Kinka's body. In the beginning, there was some confusion, but now we are also Epiphany. Ha! He is a freshman of Brother Daoyan, but he is no longer Brother Daoyan, but in the final analysis, it is just my part. 3 figures sitting on the top of the fairy cloud to reminisce old. A long wind blew through, and soon covered everything. Chapter 46, 69. In the same year, Bloodwave Supreme announced that he would withdraw from the position of Vice Palace of Life Shrine, and Life Shrine ushered in a new Vice Palace, that is, the green canal that had been written by the of the universe. He was more calm than 100,000 years ago. His eyes were full of joy and sorrow, as if he had experienced the birth and death of all things, but the only constant still has a young mind. For millions of years, the fault after the catastrophe of the universe and the chaos of cheating has not been completely restored. There is only more than 200,000 in the Supreme, and the entire generation is almost dead. Has a sword without double luck. Although this situation has been alleviated, it still takes a short period of time. The civil unrest subsided, and the complete liquidation of the imaginary universe was already on the agenda. In front of the Shrine of Life, in the outer battlefield, nearly 200,000 Supreme people have already gathered. These exalted people who have survived the catastrophe and survived to this day have practiced meditation in front of the Yunshao Palace for millions of years. They have already existed like old monsters. 200,000 Supreme, 200,000 Invincible Supreme. Each of them is the existence of the destruction of the star field. Right now, they all gathered in front of the extraterritorial battlefield. Once again set foot in this foreign battlefield, all kinds of past rush into the heart has been put on a ranger clothing sword wuxuang, looking at the extremely deep. This time, the virtual universe will be completely destroyed, down to the world, up to the virtual kingdom of the star domain. No one will be left. This is a guarantee for the divine universe, and it is also a promise to the old god. Looking back at the supreme army behind him, Jian Wushuang rushed to the battlefield outside the territory. Old Venerable, Bloodwave Supreme, Nine Tribulation King, Fengqi, Longyan Longqi, and others all followed. All of them did not hesitate in the eyes of each of them, and firmly followed behind Jian Wushuang. Nearly 300 years after the War of Catastrophe, the sword of Wushan boarding the eternal god began to counterattack and liquidate the virtual universe, waved his hands with supreme divine power to tear the cracks across the two universes, and the divine and virtual forces collided with each other at this critical point. The crack was torn into heaven, and after the chaotic virtual force, it was the star domain of the virtual force universe. Stepped into it, the eternal Excalibur, which represents the ultimate power of the divine universe, directly cracked the star field in a large area, due to the demise of the imaginary god. The luck of the imaginary universe has already decayed to a certain extent, and the exclusion of the rules of the Tao has already played a very low role in the supreme people of the divine universe. The invincible supremacy stepping on the virtual universe is still the invincible supremacy, and the realm is not suppressed at all. Located at the forefront of the army, Jian Wushuang waved his hand to wipe out the nearly 1,000 star-shaped sergeants who guarded the cracks of the guard, and looked at Lao Zun and other people, and then galloped forward. The ancestral existence of the other universe is unimaginable. Between his waved hands, the starry sky receded like a tide, and the imaginary kingdoms of countless stars fell directly into countless powder. And 200,000 Invincible Supreme scattered at the same time in the virtual universe. Every shot of Invincible Supreme directly and completely smashed one side of the star field. This counterattack is terrible and firm, and it has reached the endless situation of one side. In the scope of group destruction, the destruction brought by the half-ancestor level is not weaker than that of the ancestor level. Fenkus long time. The endless fire area will easily put everything into the sea of fire, and even the virtual force can be burned. In the universe of emptiness, an effective resistance team can no longer be organized because 99 battles of the imaginary lords of the entire universe died on the battlefield outside the territory. Even the star-level virgins were seriously injured. Again waved hands to destroy nearly 1,000 star kingdoms, and Jian Wushuang's eyes were as calm as water. He seemed to be waiting for something, and did not disperse the supreme army behind him, and proceeded cautiously. Wherever the Divine Force Cosmic Army has passed, the virtual kingdom of the star field collapsed in its entirety. That is, even some heavenly kingdoms with the existence of supremacy cannot escape such liquidation. This kind of liquidation is generally ruined, and the starry sky origin from which virtual power is derived is destroyed. In just 1 year, all the millions of star fields around the cracks disappeared, and the junction of the two universes was greatly reduced. The destroyed star field starry sky could no longer generate virtual forces and became a barren space. Faced with such a group of revenge enemies, even the surviving vain venerates have no heart of resistance and fled into the depths of the universe. If you proceed in accordance with this progress, within 10 years of chaos, the virtual universe will inevitably disappear completely. However, everything is absolutely absolute. When the special breath belonging to the Fagoma emerged in the front, Jian Wushuang realized that the most difficult enemies had been exhausted to a certain degree of imagination, and suddenly it was full to the extreme, coming from the depths of the universe of emptiness. Following the appearance of tens of thousands of six-spotted venerables as the power of the stars to arch the moon, at their forefront, there were a total of more than 10 members of the organization. Jian Wushuang's eyes were fixed, even through a strange mask. He recognized at a glance the bitter who was killed by the old venerable in the battle of the catastrophe and has died to death again, appeared again. Lao Zun's brow was slightly wrinkled, and a trace of doubt rose in his heart. At the same time, it is another treasure with a supreme power to visit from the sky dome, like a crowned emperor. A thunder snake thick like a dragon python floats around the treasure. The Emperor Devourer, who was hit hard by Lao Zun's last blow, also appeared. All the supreme hearts are sinking fiercely. This battle since the Battle of Catastrophe has been unavoidable. Looking at the unimaginable energy floating around him, Jian Wushuang realized that in nearly 3 million years, the Emperor Yen had not only died of serious injuries, but has improved. However, the Emperor Yen did not take the lead, but said with a deep voice, "Sword Wushuang, I have no intention to fight again with Seoul, and I will return to the road to take whatever happened before." When Yen said, Jian Wushuang said softly, "The way back? Do I have to wait until your cultivation is completed and wait for your comeback?" Bite the Emperor's gaze. "Sword Muzu, do you know what you are doing? You cannot bear the consequences of the total destruction of the virtual universe, even the universe behind you." Paused. The Emperor's gaze looked at Lao Zun, and the halberd said coldly, "You are just chess pieces used by him." What if it is a chess piece? Do you think that this sentence alone can stop the defeat of the virtual universe? Jian Wushuang said calmly, and there was no wave in his eyes. Bite the emperor, and then sneered. Since that is the case, then you will all stay here. As his words fell, hundreds of muddy black flags appeared out of thin air and were instantly thrown into the void. Chapter 46:70. After seeing this scene, Jian Wushuang secretly surprised himself, and the hundreds of muddy black flags that appeared out of thin air were the Fengtian flags that were previously lost in the virtual universe. But at this moment, this sky flag is not only valid for the virtual universe as before, and each one is like a supreme array of eyes, firmly fixed in the void, closing all the supremes of the divine universe. Among them, I do indeed know what secret method the Bite Emperor used to turn the heavenly flag of the divine universe into his own use, but Jian Wushuang knows that they are in trouble. As soon as Feng Tianqi fell into the void, they directly cut off their connection with the universe and the heavens and the earth. The magical power in the body could no longer be derived. Sword Wushuang waved his arms, belonging to the ancestor-level supreme power, blasted towards the endless Fengtian array, but could not shake the slightest. Bite the emperor with a grin. Just because you want to break this great array? All die to me. After the words were completed, the emperor, who was also in the Fengtian formation, faced the entire army of the divine universe and released power beyond the rules of the avenue. Void broken, such terrifying energy, only ancestral level can contend with it. All kinds of magical powers are coming one after another. Jian Wushuang directly releases the ancestral art and cuts out the river of Kendo at the same time. But the power that surpassed the rules of the avenue easily annihilated the Chuanjia Tianmen. Even the Kendo River only blocked it for a moment, and then it was all destroyed. Such terrifying forces are getting closer in Jian Wushuang's pupils. But then Lao Zun shot. He stretched out his hand directly, bursting into endless black water ripples. The two collided, bursting into a dull martyrdom, making all the supremes numb with hands and feet, and the heart beating wildly. The unimaginable horror energy slowly vents and dissipates, and the sword has no double-sided color. He can feel that the Emperor's Emperor is now stronger and has become a detached rule. Without the slightest pause, the Emperor Yen directly locked his target to Wushuang, releasing a more terrifying energy. However, the next moment Lao Zun was directly in front of him, and the nearly crazy Bite Emperor was firmly contained. With the attack of the Emperor, the nearly 10 members of the organization have also shot, each of which has the terrible half-ancestral strength. After the blood wave supreme, and others nodded slightly, Jian Wushuang directly slammed against Yen Yi. We have met again. A strange and deep voice resounded from the mouthful, and his eyes were completely scarlet. Jian Wushuang frowned slightly when he heard the words, and now he feels strangely bitter, just like a semi-finished product made up of a bunch of parts at random. Whether it is speaking or action, it is very rigid. Puppet, this is the most direct feeling of Jian Wushuang. Doesn't Bite one be the bitter one before? Jian Wushuang said secretly. Then he raised the Tailuo sword and cut straight to Bite one. A weird scene appeared. Biting E did not have any dodge. The vast sword intention directly twisted him into countless pieces. But shortly afterwards, the void suddenly picked up a few small black holes, and the already broken body Bite slowly and condensed out again and again. You can't kill me. Eat a weird way, and immediately raised his palms to bombard the sword with unparalleled power. Jian Wushuang didn't support it, and directly released the second form of Chuanjia Tianmen. Tianmen was very good, is as bright as the rising of the sun. The purest blow comes in the face of a crush, flashes for a very short time, and under this blow, his whole body becomes powder again. Watching the complete disappearance of Yen Yi, Jian Wushuang did not relax at all, and looked frowning slightly forward. Next, just like gathering sand into a tower, the bite that turned into powder was condensed again and again. There was no sound, the two bodies collided heavily, and the forces belonging to the ancestors struck together, sending out a wailing avenue. Sword shattered one's head, but it only grew out in a few seconds, which made Jian Wushuang very confused. He can feel that although he can inflict heavy damage on him, he still hasn't hurt the origin of biting one, is a bombardment every time, leaving indelible damage on Jian Wushuang's body. After so repeatedly chopping his body nearly 100 times, Jian Wushuang suddenly realized what? It's impossible. This bite one, from the beginning to the end, is the real shadow of the bite of the Emperor bite. With the attitude of giving it a try, Jian Wushuang Yijian split it from it into two pieces and reached out to the origin of Yenny, the Emperor Eater, who was struggling with Lao Zun, was shocked, looking at Jian Wushuang violently. Dare? Jia Tian de Mang flew towards him at the same time. Jian Wushuang sneered and took advantage of this great deal, and will take the source of the bite into the hands. This time, the eccentric figure could no longer condense. Sword Wushuang Yuit, the Emperor Yen, who has been calm and prestigious, regardless of it, forced the old master to go straight to the Sword Wushuang cover, and came down. The supreme energy that is as deep as a prison is like swallowing the entire universe, even if it is the ancestral sword Wushuang. All feel the great terror between life and death. If faced with this blow, his best result is a serious injury. Old Zun Qi aid is too late. On this occasion, Jian Wushuang is almost instinctive through the cheating mud tire ancestral source in his arms. The cheating mud tire was originally exposed to the void, and the mud tire could not wait to get out of the Na stone. Sword Wushuang, I want you to die? Qi Ting mud tire angered out loudly, but he didn't wait for him to move, and his back was like a thorn. He turned back slowly, and was swallowed by the terrifying energy of the Emperor's bite the next moment. In the entire Fengtian Great Array, like hundreds of millions of large sunbursts, the vast shock wave directly tears the Fengtian Great Array. Because of the dedication of the cheating mud tires, Jian Wushuang and the supreme army behind him had no casualties. However, tens of thousands of venerable venoms died under this indiscriminate attack. Took a deep breath, Jian Wushuang stared at the void, and the cheating mud tire that could not be destroyed. Also under this blow, even a trace of the original source was not left. Bite the Emperor's anger. Long hair scattered from the Emperor's crown, like a crazy demon. Feeling the crazed ancestral origin in the palm of my hand, Jian Wushuang finally realized that this is the real shadow of the Emperor's mud tire. After being sealed in Na stone, the energy that engulfed the Emperor's body also slightly weakened. For a long time, the angry bite Emperor calmed down again and said sullenly, "Give me back that point of origin, the life and death of the virtual universe. I will not interfere." Old Master came to the side of Jian Wushuang and said quietly, "If you want to go back, you must pass this level first." The atmosphere was strange and dead, and the Emperor bit the pressure to suppress the rage in his heart. "I really want to wait forever. I want to never die. It was not my divine universe at the beginning, but you, your entire organization." Jian Wushuang coldly said. Chapter 46, 71. Biting the Emperor gazing stared at Jian Wushuang, and finally said, "You will regret it, but there will be no room for regret from now on." After he said this, the starry sky began to collapse. Nearly 10,000 star fields collapsed at the same time, and countless thunder snakes landed from the ancient void. A unique energy that does not belong to the imaginary universe is derived and blessed around the Emperor's body. The road that belongs to the universe of imagination simply cannot bear and spontaneously collapses. I don't know why, after feeling the unique energy that bit the emperor's body, Jian Wushuang actually had a very familiar feeling. Lao Zun's face, which had always been waveless, was now frowning, and the palm of the black water scepter was also clenched. Wushuang, take people back to the divine universe. Lao Zun said slowly. Jian Wushuang nodded, and he obviously felt the unusual one among them. Well, you go with us. Old Master shook his head. Don't worry about me. Go. Wait for the sword Wushuang to open. The bitter emperor condensed on the void, waved down the black halo, and enveloped everyone in it. Let's stay. Everything has no way out. Bite the emperor and open his arms slowly. His arms spread slowly. The supreme energy makes the avenue collapse. Jian Wushuang's mouth twitched slightly. Since we can no longer walk away, then we too will kill him. Pure and sharp to the extreme. The vast sword is like reversing the long river. Rising up, the ancestral divine power broke through the siege and resisted the emperor's chamber of resistance. And sword Wushuang, standing side by side, directly follow the sword's straight river chase the emperor, waved his hands down to lower levels of punishment, and the ethereal ciphertext seemed to be a large array which stopped the old statue. The next moment, like the long sword made by the edge, Jian Wushuang also held up the invisible sword. The supreme god punishment was directly crushed by Jianni, allowing Lao Zun to face the emperor. The black water scepter turned into a giant palm that covered the sky and smashed towards him momentarily. Gao Ren smiled quickly, backed away from the emperor's body shape. From above the broken sky dome, suddenly emerged an ugly giant face, directly opened his mouth to bite the old venerable. Dead. A cold drink like the one from the 9-9 Taro divine sword turned into an open sky, easily destroying the ugly situation. 2 black-robe figures. Since then, they have joined forces to kill the emperor. In a million confrontations in a flash, Jian Wushuang already felt the irreversible weakness of the Emperor Yan. Although the power is still terrifying, no matter whether it is against Lao Zun or Jian Wushuang, it has already caused no serious injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Jian Wushuang almost instantly used all his magical powers, trying to hit him hard, reluctantly turned around to destroy the Elder Zun's full blow, and the empty door behind the Emperor Bite was exposed, all exposed to Jian Wushuang's eyes. Heavenly Gate of Right Realm. Heavenly Gate is extremely good. Wushuang Kendo, Zinga Huhai, Jianni 2 styles, all of which can't be dripped in the center, is like the starry sky in the sky, directly covering the entire broken starry sky. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun receded quickly, looking dignifiedly at the shaded starry sky, until the vast swordsmanship completely dissipated. A figure slowly emerged. Most of the black Jinhua clothes on S body were broken, and at his heart, a Tailuo sword was inserted. Bite the emperor's complexion, reaching for the emperor's crown above his head, and then pulling out the Tailuo sword in his heart. Grown-ups, the remaining 6 members of the phagocytic body, surrounded him. The emperor Biting smiled miserably. His arm shuddered suddenly. That would cut off everything. The Tai Luo Excalibur, one of the Ji Dao ancestors, suddenly broke into 2 parts at the tip of the sword. The pupils of Jian Wushuang's pupils shrank, and the Tai Luo Excalibur, which had accompanied him for millions of years, had been slashed all the way to the present, was actually broken, thrown by the emperor. The hilt of the Taro Excalibur was thrown in front of Jian Wushuang. Reached out to catch the hilt, he could no longer suppress the rage, held up the invisible sword, and slashed towards the emperor. Old Master also set off at the same time. A tremendous black water treasure came close, ate the black light in the eyes of the emperor, and waved his arms. 2 dark lights rose in response to the storm, and they were directed towards the 2. Sword cut off the black light. Jian Wushuang was another sword, and Lao Zun's blow was also suppressed. Belonged to Jian Wushuang's strongest blow breaking through the strange energy that engulfed the Emperor's body, and the black water treasure phase subsequently suppressed. Boom. The endless energy turned into a tide billowing, completely engulfing everything, and the 6 members of the Fagoma, who were too late to evade, were engulfed in it. The starry sky collapsed in a large area, exposing the void of the ancient dead. Sword Wushuang paused in place, breathing heavily. The entire right arm had cracked out of the road, and the blood was flowing down. When the energy tide slowly receded, the miserable extreme Emperor appeared. He suddenly coughed out a breath of blood, and his face was still dignified despite his embarrassment. "You lost." Jian Wushuang stepped forward slowly, his voice cold. "I lost," the Emperor Bite was saying to him, and it was like saying to himself, "How could I lose?" The Emperor Biting suddenly raised his head and looked at him, and the Elder Zun, "How could I lose?" After the words, a vast black light rose from his high palm and went straight into the ultimate void. OM. The dark light, like the giant pillar of the sky, is long-lasting. The layers of dim halo spread like ripples over the void. Sword warriors didn't understand it, but Lao Zun changed his face suddenly. Emperor saw the face of Lao Zun's great changes and seemed to make a bad breath, laughing aloud. "How can I fail? How can I fail? Since I'm going to die, don't think about it too well. I think they will soon sense my breath and lock it here. I want you all to be buried with me." He coughed up his blood again, and the Emperor Bite was crazy. "However, there is another way. The power of choice is in your hands. Let me go. I will never let them find here." Jian Wushuang looked at Lao Zun, and he already knew something clearly in his heart. "Do you know what I hate the most?" A deep voice sounded from Lao Zun's mouth, and his eyes gradually became cold. "The most hated is the threat." At the next moment, the Blackwater scepter suddenly flew. Thousands of Blackwater horses directly entangled the Emperor Yen, dragging him towards the old master. The dark pupil reflects the birth and death of all things, even the desolation of which time dies. The Emperor finally uttered in horror, "No, you can't kill me." Jian Wushuang, "I'm dead. Xian certainly won't agree." The Emperor Yen looked at Jian Wushuang like looking at the last life-saving straw, and Jian Wushuang shivered when he heard the name. "How much do you know about him?" I know a lot, as long as you let." Without waiting for him to finish, Lao Zun has already completely killed him. Even the soul of the gods has never been left. Chapter 4672, one of the behind-the-scenes pushers to promote the death battle between the two universes. The death of the Emperor is extremely invisible, and die, together with the same mysterious phagocytic tissue, also completely disappeared into the sky of nothingness, and it seemed to have never appeared before. But the death of the Emperor Bite, but it makes no one feel comfortable. Lao Zun's brows were tight, and his face was never dignified, and Jian Wushuang was already in a state of confusion. This was not the first time he had heard of Zuanyi's news from outsiders, but each time he only stopped at the beginning and ended abruptly. "Master, what kind of existence are you? Why am I already on this paradise road, but I still don't get any news from you?" Jian Wushuang stared at the void, and suddenly felt a little weak. "Lao Zun, I'm a little tired." He slowly closed his eyes. Lao Zun turned to look at him, and nodded. "Then, let's go back." "No, the imaginary universe will not be removed in one day, and the divine universe will be like a thorn in the back. I don't want to let the juniors shroud in the shadows anymore." Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with firmness. "I want to replace the juniors, erase this biggest threat." However, at the next moment, a breath of chaos and havoc seemed like a mist, which instantly swept over the broken sky. However, this chaotic breath only existed for a moment, and then completely disappeared. but everyone felt the breath of not knowing where to start and how to disappear. Jian Wushuang shuddered in his heart and could not help looking at Lao Zun. A moment later, the old respectful said with a deep voice, "The eye of Chaos Spring is loose. Retreat." Jian Wushuang didn't dare to delay for a moment and directly issued a command to retreat. All the Supremes did not hesitate at all, and all released their divine power to sprint towards the universe of divine power. The chaotic spring eye, which symbolizes the extreme point of the divine universe, is the weakest place. Every loosening will bring great horror. At the same time, no one knows where they will be connected one after another in Chaos Spring's eyes. Even Lao Zun is extremely afraid of this. Jian Wushuang didn't dare to imagine what a terrible situation there would be once the eye of Chaos Spring opened again. Before the Emperor's death, the dark light that he sent to the Sky Dome and the words he spoke made him feel a little palpitations. And after the retreat of the Supreme Army, the place where the Emperor Nirvana was originally began to float with fine mottled black stripes. Since it is about to enter the hinterland of the virtual universe, it will take several years to return to the divine universe at their speed. 2 years later, Jian Wushuang and others stepped into the extraterritorial battlefield from the virtual universe and went straight to the Shrine of Life, now protecting the whole life divine temple of the divine power universe. It is still calm. Afterwards, the Deputy Hall Master Dao Yin, Supreme, took more than a dozen disciples out of the palace gate and arched the hand. Sword Wushuang nodded, and then asked, "In recent decades, can there be something different in the universe?" Dao Yin, Supreme, thought for a moment and shook his head. "Everything is still the same, and there is no abnormality, but there are special energy fluctuations in the past few years near the Luodu star field. The disciple I sent earlier to explore has not returned." Jian Wushuang heard the words, when even if he said, "All the Supremes are all waiting to guard the Yunshao Palace, and the half-ancestor will follow me." No one had any controversy. The Supreme Army, which had not suffered many casualties, stood on the spot. Jian Wushuang and a group of half-ancestors rushed to Luodu Starland. After these several events, Luodu Starland has been raised to the highest level of vigilance, and the teams stationed here in turn alone have nearly 1,000 invincible Supreme. Rotates every 1,000 years, and it has been millions of years. But now, the more forward, the weaker the power of the invincible Supreme is almost faintly imperceptible. "Damn, don't make any more mistakes," Jian Wushuang secretly said, and his figure accelerated. When the broken Luodu star field is as usual, everyone breathed out. Thousands of invincible Supremes stationed here all flew out of the city and came to Jianwu double-sided. "I have seen the eternal God. Are there any abnormalities in the eyes of Chaos Spring?" Jian Wushuang asked. "Invincible Supreme, headed by, returned to eternal God. Nothing has been different in millions of years." Jian Wushuang breathed a deep breath in his heart, but before he could speak, the eyes of Chaos Spring, who had been in a silent state, suddenly burst into shocking energy. The domineering aura that easily overwhelms the divine power is like a boundless galaxy, and Lu makes up the entire sky. Seeing this situation, Jian Wushuang directly released the ancestral divine power and turned it into a layer of barriers to block all the invincible supremacy behind him. At the same time, Lao Zun beside him murmured softly, "They hear." The barrier, transformed by ancestral divine power, was almost instantly covered with cracks. Under the tremendous energy, it actually only supported for a moment, and then collapsed. Lao Zun then raised the Blackwater scepter to face it, only to resist the supreme energy. All the half-ancestors present were shocked. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun joined hands and were actually able to resist. This can emit such energy. What would calm be? He did not dare to carelessly gazing at the center of the fiery energy. Next moment, a young man with a long shirt and soared eyebrows walked out slowly. The rules of the avenue belonging to the divine universe were very repulsive, but when he approached him, he turned into a fan. The long hair bundled up behind him floated up against the wind. Jian Wushuang's mood fell to the bottom of the valley instantly. He could feel the energy, not weaker than the Emperor's bite, and even past it. The channel of the chaos spring I slowly closed, but the energy of the galaxy flooding the sky dome did not decay at all. And the young man who came from the eyes of chaos spring first looked at the universe he was in, then stretched out his palm to feel his own energy, and finally looked at Jian Wushuang and others, looked at Lao Zun for a moment. He was a little puzzled, but finally stopped on Jian Wushuang's body. Then he slowly extended his palm and pointed at Jian Wushuang. I'm familiar with your breath. Is it the person who broke into the Dian universe millions of years ago? With this remark, Lao Zun suddenly opened his eyes suddenly. He had never had the gaffe comparable to his current situation. Have you been to Dayanhuan? Jian Wushuang was instantly clear when he heard the three characters of Dayanhuan. Was involved in the chaos of time and space, entered inadvertently, and lay there for 500,000 years. In the beginning, I was involved in the chaos of time and space, and entered a large world. I thought it should be called Dayanhuan. Jian Wushuang lowered his voice and said to Lao Zun at a very fast speed. Chapter 46:73. Then he raised his head and looked at the young man, floating like a fairy quietly. Exactly. The young man stunned slightly, and then said loudly, It's useless to say more. Did you send the head to me automatically, or did I pick it up by myself? Jian Wushuang was depressed, and he began to suspect that he had a killing physique. Step by step to today, there are so many people who want to kill him all the time. And this guy who does not know where to come from now, he has to pick up his head as soon as he comes up. My head, I'm afraid you are powerless. The young man sneered. Then I will take it by myself. This sword, Fairy Ding Bai, don't kill the nameless and asexual people. You self-reported the name. I will take your life again. Sword Wushuang. Jian Wushuang said coldly. An invisible long sword had already condensed in his hands. The young man who claimed to be the sword Fairy Ding Bai, his disdainful eyes gradually disappeared when he saw the invisible long sword in Jian Wu's hands. I didn't expect it to be such a pure kendo in such a big realm, which is really a blessing. Jian Xian Ding Bai whispered softly, Well, wait until I appreciate your kendo, then kill you again. After the words were finished, he reached out and flicked his waistcoat, and then a real sword with fairy rhythm appeared. Jian Wushuang's heart moved slightly, a kind of kendo that was also pure to the extreme diffused. Old master, as soon as we meet, you will leave quickly. After he whispered this sentence, he stood in the air with an invisible sword. Ding Bai reached out his hand and waved, and the vast and magnificent energy was built into a dojo, covering them both. One move, this move is up to you. Ding Bai retreated half a step, carrying his sword behind him, said indifferently. Sword Wushuang didn't have an opening, directly chopped the invisible sword in his hand, and released the first form of the Knight of the Tailuo Jianjian. The dojo suddenly dimmed, and the darkness that could swallow everything came. Ding Bai whispered, and then carved a sword tactic out of thin air, with his left hand that didn't hold the sword, which was actually to directly destroy the Yongye style. But when the same 0 and 0 reading 00 KXS of Yong Yi was destroyed, a more vicious sword rose into the sky, the atmosphere that controlled the 4 seasons of the universe, and it was overwhelming. Shua, Shuyang, spring, and autumn. Rise one after another, just enter here, as if at a glance eternal. S body shirt fluttered against the wind. Ding Baiyi's calm eyes gradually turned into fiery, lifted up the real sword covered with fairy charm. One sword out. There is no fancy sword. It is a simple flat thorn, but it is very powerful, as if it is close to all desperate sword. Blended his thoughts of the tarot sword style seasons and was defeated without any suspense. That unique sword easily broke through the four-season sword style and continued to cast forward with a straight cast, crushing the peepa bone of Jian Wushuang's left shoulder, holding the sword. The blood of God fell, and the bone of God was damaged. "Sword Wushuang!" Feng Qi exclaimed, and then rushed forward, but was stopped by Lao Zun's hand. "With me, Wushuang is unharmed." Feng Qi said that although he stopped, his eyes were full of tension. In the dojo, Jian Wushuang let the blood on his left shoulder drool, staring at Ding Baiyi. Ding Baiyi reported with a smile, "The swordsmanship you used just now was not your own. Although it is extremely delicate, it has already lost its intelligence and is not a good one. If I just insisted on taking your head just now, I am afraid that you are not like now this is intact. If your swordsmanship only stops so, then I would advise you to take the lead and kill and save the ugliness." Sword Muzu didn't speak, slowly raised the invisible sword in his hand, and thousands of swords were spread like vines in the air. At the same time, a solemn, unparalleled treasure condensed behind him. Majestic. It's a little interesting. Ding Baiyi's mouth was tilted, and the sword in his hand was clear. At the next moment, his entire figure was directly transformed into a stream of streamers straight forward. Sword Muzu suddenly opened his eyes, and the vast sword was like a galaxy of galaxy, and the most pure and extreme straight cut, sinking down. Only this sword, the constructed dojo can't bear it directly, and it can be broken. The indescribable sword intention surpasses any of his previous swords. Two pure and extreme swords collided, and the magnificent martyrdom swept the whole world with Jian Wushuang as the center. The sword intention was torn and damaged, and the majestic treasure image behind the sword Wushuang was finally torn. The world mourns, and the invisible and quality roads are all agitated. Seems to be the most tragic martyrdom, but in fact it is just the sharpest sword, piercing all his sword intentions. Sword without both sides exposed bitterness. Is this the way to lose? Even Lao Zun can no longer be indifferent, but at the next moment, time seemed to stagnate, and the layers of martyrdom seemed to stop at the last moment of the explosion. And the absolute sword that had no way to stop was also a trembling, and finally stopped before the last layer of sword intention. A long wind blew through, messing up the hair, looked at the real sword that was only one finger away from his neck, but it was hard to get in. Sword Wushuang then looked at Ding Baiyi in front of him. The palm of the hand holding the hilt shook uncontrollably. Yu Kanshu www. Okanshu. Calm Ding Baiyi's clear face began to pale, and a drop of rich scarlet blood dripped from his nasal cavity. How? Without a word, he went straight to the sky and passed out. Jian Wushuang's subconscious, impulsive power enveloped Ding Baiyi's divine body and laid him flat in the void. Seeing this situation, the elder Zun and Shuebujizuan quickly came to Jian Wushuang. Glanced at him, Lao Zun directly raised the Blackwater scepter to prepare to kill Ding Baiyi. Lao Zun. Jian Wushuang opened his mouth coldly, reaching out to stop Lao Zun shaking his head. Can't kill. I feel that he has no strong intention to kill me, and if he kills, he won't win. What time is this? Do you know that he just went further, and the consequences are unbearable? Feng Qi said anxiously. Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered, and finally he said, "Can't kill. He let me do it before, this time when I gave it back to him." Several half-ancestors sighed quietly and stopped talking. Lao Zun also slowly withdrew the Blackwater scepter, and nodded at him. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang looked at the distant road, returned to Yinshao Palace. The eyes of Chaos Spring were blocked again, and everything seemed to have not happened except for the more broken sky. Back to the Yunshao Palace, Jian Wushuang set up another divine pavilion, put the white cloth Dingbai in it, and then used the supreme supernatural power to block all around the divine pavilion. As soon as he woke up, Jian Wushuang could perceive it instantly. Such a Dayan who is most likely to come from the secret came to the sword fairy of the divine power universe, so that the thoughts of Jian Wushuang gradually calmed down. Chapter 46-74. In the past millions of years, all the seemingly unruly things seem to have developed in one direction, since in the extreme sea star field, from the mouth of the snake god, I heard that the top of the universe is not an ancestor, but also encountered an ancestor who surpassed the ancestor and a bitter emperor of the same strength. The two of them could never belong to the divine universe or the imaginary universe, but they seem to be working hard for a goal. In the land of sorrow and hunger, the old man who stopped acting as the guide, the strange mud tires of cheating, the Xuani known to the emperor, are as unknown as the mist. Jian Wushuang desperately wants to know an answer. He feels he is enveloped by a larger cloud. After a year of silence, he walked out of the Yunshao Palace and into the sea of clouds behind the palace. Lao Zun's thin body still sits and fishes in the sea of clouds. Since Jian Wushuang has been fishing for hundreds of thousands of years, it seems that the unrequited old venerable father has begun to have a hobby of fishing. A wireless jade fishing rod was thrown into the sea of clouds, and Jian Wushuang's figure then sat down next to Lao Zun. "How many fish have you caught?" "I haven't caught a tail yet." It's no wonder that these fish have been caught by us for hundreds of thousands of years, and we have long been spiritually aware that we can't eat hooks. Jian Wushuang began to tell Lao Zun how he had been fishing for so many years. Lao Zun's calm face also gradually got a smile. His subtle smile has only been revealed to two people for millions of years. One is Sword Wushuang, and the other is naive. At the end, Lao Zun looked at Jian Wushuang and smiled. "Do you have many questions to ask me?" Jian Wushuang scratched his head. "Yes, there are some problems, but I don't know where to start." "Then let me answer you one by one," Lao Zun said quietly. "I originally wanted to wait for you to grow up slowly before telling you everything you want to know. I thought that the arrival of that day would be it's been a long time, but it was so fast." "Musut, you know Dayanhuan?" Jian Wushuang thought about it a little, and then from being dragged into the chaotic flow of time and space by the false god to entering the great realm of Feng Xuanqi, everything that happened in the process was told to Lao Zun. "It turns out that I didn't expect you to get in there." Lao Zun's tone was stable. "The so-called Dayan, Huan. The simplest and clearest explanation is the ultimate of the avenue, the original of everything. At the same time, it is only a general term. In the world of Dayan, fairy world, realm, everything and everything are coexisting." Sword Wushuang moved intentionally and asked, "What kind of existence does that ancestor class belong to in Dayan?" Lao Zun looked at him and smiled slightly, very common. Jian Wushuang was shocked. He knew that Lao Zun wouldn't lie, but it was precisely because he didn't lie that made him feel terrible. Is already the end of an infinite universe, but it is only a very common existence in that great world. What was above that ancestor level? He could hardly imagine it. Did the sword fairy Ding Bai come here from Dayanhuan? Jian Wushuang asked. Lao Zun nodded. "It should be no one except a Yanhuan. Even if there are other universes, no one can cause harm to you." Jian Wushuang nodded and said, "Did the emperor bite from Dayanhuan?" "Naturally, The kind of derivation that he used that transcended the category of divine power proved his identity. Lao Tzu said, looking at Jian Wushuang at the same time, "As for me, it is an independent place with no surviving life. The presence." Jian Wushuang was a little unsure, but he didn't know how to ask. "Wushuang, do you know what the predecessor of Dianhuan was?" Jian Wushuang shook his head. Seems to be recalling. The elder muttered, "The first predecessor of Dianhuan is actually a universe of one side, and the other is the same universe as the divine universe and the imaginary universe. Dai Yanhuan's original predecessor was called Jia, and I was in another universe called Yen. There was also a catastrophe between these two universes. Eventually, as the other side's universe was completely eradicated and eliminated, it became Dian. And the universe called Yen is the one who is finally destroyed." Listening to Lao Tzu's narrative, Jian Wushuang began to feel that his brain capacity was not enough. From the universe to Dianhuan, it seemed more complicated and somewhat familiar. Why are the two universes so good that they don't die? Is it just because they destroyed the other party and promoted to Dianhuan? Jian Wushuang asked in a deep voice. Lao Tzu shook his head. The factors in between are too complicated, just like today's endless war between your two universes. Jian Wushuang froze. He finally understood the feeling of déjà vu. The Holocaust battle between the Yen universe and the universe, with the demise of the Yen universe. The universe finally promoted to Dian Huan. And now the universe of divine power and the universe of imagination are not exactly like this route. He was startled and seemed to understand what he already knew. In the polar sea star field, and Lao Tzu met for the first time, and set the three conditions. The first condition is to completely destroy the hostile universe without leaving any creatures. If the only condition for the promotion from the universe to Dianhuan is to completely destroy the hostile universe, is it not the only way for the universe to be promoted to Dianhuan if the condition of promise to the Lord? Jian Wushuang was silent for a long time. He looked at Lao Tzu and said, "Lao Tzu, as long as the void universe is destroyed, will the divine universe be promoted to Dianhuan?" "No, this is the ultimate way, and cannot accommodate the second Dianhuan. Only by erasing the original Dianhuan can you be promoted." Jian Wushuang nodded and stopped talking. Old Master no longer spoke, and after a long time, he slowly said, "In fact, the conditions mentioned before are just some jokes. You don't have to take it seriously. What do you say? There is a saying in the world, 'A gentleman is hard to chase after a horse,' and I will promise to count when I come down." Jian Wushuang smiled, then pretended to inadvertently, raised his hand and patted the old gentleman's shoulder. "This is an agreement between the two of us." Lao Tzu shook his head and smiled slightly and stopped talking. This dialogue in the cloud top did not last long, but the amount of information contained in it and the source of incomparable complexity almost directly raised the existing knowledge of Jian Wushuang. This finally let him know that the ultimate avenue is not the ancestor level. Tianwai still has heaven. And his master Xuani, is it possible that he came out of the original all-round Dianhuan that contains all things? See the moon in the water, and see the sun in the cloud. Chapter 4675. The sword fairy Dingbai, who realized the kendo to the extreme, appeared in the supreme fairy posture. The simplest and purest kendo, in one hand, almost raised the sword to a completely new level. After playing against Dingbai, Jian Wushuang not only did not suffer setbacks, but instead began to appreciate the obscure levels. His own swordsmanship has already reached the level of transformation, opening and closing full of loneliness and arrogance. Ding Baiyi's sword is the most ordinary sword, but it has also reached the transformation. His one move, one collection, and one release are simple and pure, as if to eat once and sleep once. Dull. But this is the most mundane trick, but it has turned into a desperate sword, pushing the sword Wushuang to death again and again. And Jian Wushuang's hard work today is to learn to gain momentum. From heaven, the sword fairy Ding Bai from Daanhuan fell asleep for 20,000 years, and Jian Wushuang was also on the Yunding Shin Pavilion and spent 20,000 years of hard work. In order to have some fun in that boring way, Jian Wushuang planted a peach tree seedling in the center of the huge dojo in front of the shrine. For 20,000 years, the saplings had grown to towering giant trees, and the monsters bred in their trees were lying on the treetop on time every day to watch Jian Wushuang practice swords. One day after 20,000 years, the door of the silent Shenge was opened, a plain shirt, and the pale Ding Bai slowly walked out of the Shenge. He looked at Jian Wushuang, who was sitting under the peach tree with a slightly uncomfortable face, and smiled. "Hey, why didn't you kill me at that time? And run here, torture me, all day?" Sword Muzu grinned, stretched his hands to stand aside, and the real sword of Qi's spirit threw at Ding Bai. Ding Bai reached out to take it, so he made a bad voice and said, "Don't you kill me while I was stunned. Aren't you afraid that I will kill you now?" "Killed you at that time. It was invincible. I disdain. If you kill me in reverse now, it is also invincible. How can I worry?" Jian Wushuang smiled. "Why don't you sinister?" Ding Bai was dumb for a while, but didn't know how to refute it, so he had to scream and jumped up to the eaves of the divine pavilion with his sword, and then he fell asleep. Jian Wushuang didn't care about him anymore. He continued to sharpen his moves under the peach tree. The reason why Ding Bai passed away was purely because the chaotic flow of time and space unknowingly eroded his meridians, and when he came up, he fought like a chicken blood. The meridians were cut off directly for protection. With the supply of Yan Li, he just died like a crash. This guy is like looking for revenge. But because of the cold on the road, after putting down the harsh words in front of the Chiu family, he directly fell like a dead pig and fell awake. It was Jian Wushuang who met him at a loss. If he was someone else, he would have been called away. In this way, for another 1,000 years, Jian Wushuang has not been slack for a moment. Even the simplest straight cut can be practiced for centuries. During this period, Ding Bai, who was sleeping on the eaves of the divine pavilion from the very beginning of impatientness to watching the sword Wushuang practiced with boredom, began to give advice from time to time. The comprehension of kendo, Jian Wushuang, obviously exceeded Ding Bai's expectations. Ding Bai also gradually realized that the crushing on him was not a crushing on kendo comprehension, but a pure realm suppression. Nature, the self-proclaimed sword fairy, also provoked the battle again. "I haven't forgotten the main purpose of this visit. Are you going to take the lead and let me pick it up personally?" Ding Bai said coldly on the side of the dojo. Jian Wushuang shrugged. "I always have people in my head who want to take them, but they all died in front of me one by one. If you want, you can take it yourself." It's a big tone. Ding Bai sneered. Then he stepped forward and waved a branch with peach blossoms off the peach tree. Jian Wushuang's eyes narrowed. And then he stretched out his hand and pulled off a branch with peach blossoms. The mighty and mighty divine power swept away in an instant, entrenched in the sky of the whole dojo like a dragon. Ding Bai then released a more terrifying force, confronting Jian Wushuang. Yanli is a special energy that suppresses and contains divine and virtual powers. It only belongs to the higher rules of Daanhuan, and the emperor of the emperor's power is Yanli. Looking at the slightly thin white clothes, Jian Wushuang did not relax his vigilance. He practiced kendo for tens of thousands of years, but he was ready to defeat him one day. "Use your own swordsmanship to face me. Otherwise, I can guarantee that you will not be able to hold 10 breaths in the future." Ding Bai said softly. "Nature." Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and smiled. Wushuang Kendo, Zingahuhai Jiani second form. River. Wushuang Kendo derives countless swordsmanship in one, and the roaring roar is like a reeling tianha, a grand view rewinding tianha up against the current, carrying endless power, dashing towards Ding Bai. And sword Wushuang, at the moment, standing like a majestic sword, standing in the mighty sword, holding up the peach blossom branch in his hand and falling straight. It's kind of interesting Ding Bai slightly raised the corner of his mouth, but inserted the peach branch in the back of his neck with his backhand, facing the vast Jianhe River like a shock. Stepped out. Not only did the surging Jianhe not cause any damage to Ding Bai, but instead he took advantage of it to reach the sword without two sides. The peach branch in his hand instantly pointed to the face of Jian Wushuang. This seemingly extremely ordinary sword, if you slow down, you can see that it is no less than 100,000 shots. 100,000 shots, all counted as a sword. How crazy is the sword? Jian Wushuang's body is inclined, forced to help, but can only resist. But the 100,000 swords were so powerful and terrifying that they directly dismantled his resistance and cut off the peach branches in the sword without both hands. The remaining was nearly 50,000 swords, and the unstoppable nail was nailed in front of him. Rao is the sword of Wushuang's immortal body, and he also feels the chest tightness. If it is replaced by a sword, I am afraid that there are already countless transparent holes in his body. However, Jian Wushuang didn't feel discouraged. After shockingly pushing Ding Bai away, he stretched out his hand and folded another peach branch, and took the lead to cut him. Belongs to the offensive of the unparalleled kendo, wide open and close, one by one straight cut. All fell on the peach branch of Ding Bai, like thousands of soldiers bombarded down. Even Ding Bai felt the suffocation of chest tightness. This guy is really good. Ding Bai secretly wondered, just as he was about to fight back again. The peach blossom branch suddenly broke in his hand. Jian Wushuang had no love at all, fluttered and retreated, and at the same time waved a branch to him again. Come again! Then come again. Chapter 46-76. The years have passed, and Yundao Palace has been talking about kendo for 100,000 years. Peach blossoms are still there, and the little monsters of that year have already appeared. The two under the tree never seemed tired, and even the peach blossom branch above the peach tree was about to be refracted. Don't hit it, my hair is almost gone. This sentence became Taoxian's mantra, but it didn't seem to be of much use. Broken branches have already piled up 2 hills. One of the plain shirts, kendo changed the restrained and implicit for more than 100,000 years, just like the ultimate sword made by the edge. Every attack is extremely fierce. Another black shirt shape. His swordsmanship also changed from the opening and closing of hundreds of thousands of years ago, just like the sword hidden in the room. Every time he attacked, it became as heavy as water. They are already learning from each other. When the last sword of the black shirt body pushed the front sword of the plain shirt body, this 100,000-year theory was the last thing to do. Don't fight anymore. This seat is tired. Ding Bai stretched out a lazy waist, threw the peach blossom branch in his hand to Jian Wushuang, and lay back on the roof of Shenge. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, and after throwing the branch to Taoxian, he also leapt to the top of the eaves. Looking at Yunwan Yunshu in front of him, he asked, "Why did you kill me at the beginning?" Ding Bai said comfortably, "Trusted by others, it is so simple." The next sword Wushuang was even more puzzled. "I just didn't intend to enter that day, Yanhuan. And before I could do anything, I planted the enemy family?" Ding Bai heard the words and looked at him. "In that wild land, the little emperor's cronies, but died in your hands." Jian Wushuang just wanted to refute, suddenly thought back to something, and then stunned. "Is the few guys I killed at the time a strong force in Dayanhuan?" Ding Bai pouted. "That kind of inferior cronies. It's all right to kill 100, but what happened afterwards was the key that led me to take your life. When you left Dianhuan, did you let go of a blue wand? Jian Mushuang said, "It seems that he let go of one." "Then you know that the Qingyuan is the emperor? You let go of the emperor." Ding Bai didn't have a good air. "I didn't know anything at the time. It was purely that she begged me for help. I didn't have anything to do with what happened next." Jian Wushuang hurriedly said, "You guys." Ding Bai shook his head helplessly and then stopped talking. He tentatively said, "Don't you plan to kill me?" "Too lazy to kill. This seat is suddenly not interested." Ding Bai lazily said, "Again, if you kill you now, wouldn't it be invincible? Then if you don't kill me, what should you tell me when you go back? You are not afraid of what little emperor found." Ding Bai sneered disdainfully. "I only wanted to give back to his emperor's past gratitude. I said killing is killing. Who dares to refute?" Looking at the domineering side leakage, Jian Mushuang laughed aloud. "So when I have the power of a battle, let's try again." He adjusted a comfortable posture. "Even if one day I will certainly cut you under the sword with my own hand to use my sword. But that day, I'm afraid I will never come." Ding Bai finished his last sentence and slept. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly, swept down the pavilion, and returned to the Yunshao Palace. After sleeping for 100 years in the Shenge, Ding Bai was ready to leave. Jian Wushuang and Lao Zun sent him to Luodu's star field. In front of Chaos Spring, Jian Wushuang waved his hand to wipe the seal from the eyes of Chaos Spring, and the majestic, eccentric energy poured out like a hole in the sky. Ding Bai, who is still a plain shirt, stands in front of the vast energy. No one spoke. Ding Bai walked forward slowly. After dozens of steps, he slowly turned his head to look at Jian Wushuang, and then walked forward. "Ding Bai!" Jian Wushuang shouted loudly, and then threw an object forward. Ding Bai reached back without catching his head. It was a peach branch. "I'll never see you again." The palm that clasped the peach blossom branch gently waved, and the back body shape disappeared into the vast energy and disappeared completely, waving his hands to reseal the chaotic spring eyes. Jian Wushuang looked at Lao Zun. "Lao Zun, you said that Ding Bai entered the turbulent flow at that time. Is it okay?" "Naturally, no mistakes can be made in his realm. At most, a little uncomfortable." Lao Zun replied. Jian Mushuang breathed a sigh of relief. "I'm going to take another Shoshin again, and now I can finally calm down and settle the liquidation." Lao Zun didn't speak and walked smoothly behind Jian Wushuang. Yunshao Palace. At the moment, in the vast hall, only Jian Wushuang and the old statue sat side by side. On the case in front of them, he was trapped by the divine power with a dark light. That is a source of cost to the emperor, and it is also a mud tire. "Old master, is there a way to destroy it?" Jian Wushuang said in a deep voice. Lao Zun nodded, stretched out his palm with his hand, and stamped it on the light runes with ruinous meaning rose up, and several wisps of misty black smoke surged, and finally completely dissipated and never left a trace. In this way, then, the emperor of the blessed emperor really died out. Lao Zun nodded. Jian Wushuang was relieved, and then he raised his chin with his hand and wondered, "What is it? Mud tire, what is it?" Qi Ting does not hesitate to wipe out the heavenly path and seduce thousands of monks to condense that even the emperor also has mud tires. The mud tire, in general, is actually the obsession of the past, the practice of the world, all of my own perceptions, collectively these aspects. Lao Zun explained, and want to enter the realm of the great Yanhuan by himself. One step is to cut off the past of the world. Qi Ting wanted to enter that Dianhuan at that time. Jian Wushuang stunned. Lao Zun said, "This possibility is not ruled out, but if you remove the mud tire from yourself, Even if you enter the realm of Yen Xian, you will also be hit hard, so he will lure so many monks to use it as his mud tire. Originally, Jian Wushuang nodded. Now both internal and external chaos are settled, and it is time to re-enter the virtual universe. The elder nodded. It'll take another 100,000 years. I need to adjust my interest rate for a while. After several days of analysis, Lao Zun withdrew from Yunxiao Palace and returned to his residence. Standing in the vast square, Jian Wushuang directly adjusted her breath. Now that the phagocytosis has disappeared, even with the emperor, the imaginary universe has opened its doors completely. Jian Wushuang's last thing to do is to completely eliminate the nightmare that exists for the divine universe. Chapter 4677. For the supreme, powerful, 100,000 years are just a time for perception. At this point, more than 100,000 invincible supremacy closed at the same time. For the next liquidation, make every preparation. Jian Wushuang enters the realm of ecstasy at the same time, and he confronts Ding Bai over and over again in his consciousness. For 100,000 years on Kendo, Jian Wushuang has learned to gain momentum, which is indispensable for the framework that is full of Wushuang Kendo. At the same time, he is also looking forward to one day to be able to confront the sword Fairy Ding Bai once. Above the top of the cloud, the clouds are rolling, and the road flows slowly. In 100,000 years, how much mortal dust rises and falls, and the Zongmen ancient school rises lonely all at the same time. And for those supreme who have surpassed the big boundary between life and death, it is just a flick. After 100,000 years, all the invincible supremacy of the retreats wake up one after another, and the divine power has been adjusted to the most peak state. For this final liquidation moment, the Dragon and Phoenix clan pulled almost all the supremes of the clan to the Yunxiao Palace. If they can completely erase the virtual universe, this will be of supreme merit for them. De Yen, who was in a blue shirt, slowly came to Jian Wushuang and said softly, "Master, they have already come." Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes, and the breath of Dedeo continued to flow from his whole body. He habitually looked behind him, but he didn't see Lao Zun's figure. Pressing down the distraction in his heart, Jian Wushuang said, "You are naive. Please invite old master." The naive responded and hurried to Lao Zun's residence. "Master, this time I want to go with you to experience it." Supreme Master Dao Yen solemnly said, "I also hope that Master will agree." Jian Wushuang smiled. "No, you will be with you this time." Supreme Master Dao Yen heard the words and, overjoyed, "Thank you, Master." At this moment, the slightly panicked figure of the young child appeared. Ma'am, Lao Zun are not in his residence. It seems to be gone." As soon as this remark came out, Jian Wushuang shuddered in his heart when even he rushed to fly to Lao Zun's residence. Bloodwave and others looked at each other, and then followed behind Jian Wushuang. In the sea of clouds, the most common house is Lao Zun's residence. Feeling the rich divine power around him, Jian Wushuang sank in his heart and then pushed the door in. On the wooden bed, a black robe turned his back. "Lao Zun?" Jian Wushuang asked softly. Then the figure on the wooden bed stood up, and Lao Zun's unique face appeared in his eyes. Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief, but before he could speak, Lao Zun spoke first. "Wushuang, I'm gone. Go where I should go. You just don't miss it if I haven't been here. As for the conditions I said to you before, it was a joke. Forget about them. I do and want you to go to that point. The things I have experienced cannot happen a second time." "No, where are you going?" Jian Wushuang shook his head again and again. He tried not to let Lao Zun leave. "Are you going to the Lazizi, Yen alone?" However, this is only the last ghost image left by Lao Zun and cannot be touched at all. Lao Zun finally looked at Jian Wushuang with a smile in his eyes. These days with you are my few pleasant days. Staying by your side makes me feel like I was back when I was young, but it's about to leave. Remember, never come to Dian, Huan. This is something you shouldn't know. Forget about all this. After saying all these words, the old figure finally dissipated completely. Jian Wushuang reached out unconsciously to grab, but just held a small handful of tiny stars. At this point, the old master completely disappeared, and his disappearance was too clean, as if it had never existed in the universe. Jian Wushuang slowly backed away, sitting on the wooden bed with force. For him, Lao Zun is also a teacher and a friend. Without him, the entire divine universe is afraid that it would have been annihilated and the spirits would be covered. However, the divine universe has now completely won, but he quietly disappeared like a passerby. This makes Jian Wushuang difficult to accept. In his heart, the existence of Lao Zun is almost the same as Xian Yi. Xian Yi is a teacher and Lao Zun is a friend, but now both of them have disappeared without a trace, even inexplicably. They are like passers-by in Jian Wushuang's life, giving him supreme fate and help, but they don't know what happened and disappeared without leaving a clue. Dian Huan. Everything must be related to that Dian Huan. All the answers I want to know must be there. Jian Wushuang suddenly raised his head. He wanted to step into the chaos of time and space regardless, went to that vain place, but then gave up again. He is gone. What about the divine universe? If the imaginary universe is not removed, the divine universe will not be peaceful for a day. But in fact, if Jian Wushuang completely wiped out the imaginary universe, he couldn't get down. After all, the virtual universe is too vast, and the same creatures are not even much smaller than the divine universe. It would be too horrible to kill them all, and to kill them. Lao Zun seemed to have seen the deep thoughts of Jian Wushuang before quietly leaving. For a long time, Jian Wushuang looked down at the mottled stars in his hand and whispered softly, "Lao Zun, I'm sorry for you." The door of the cabin closed quietly, and he was silent for a long time. Although Xue Bujizuan and others did not know what happened, they had already guessed it, and all returned to the Yunshao Palace, waiting for the arrival of Jian Wushuang. Only Daoyan Supreme has stood and waited outside the door. 1,000 years passed, and the closed door opened again. Jian Wuwei was a little haggard. He looked at Daoyan Supreme, who was waiting for him, and smiled reluctantly. "Why not go?" "I can feel Master's sadness, but I don't know how to share it, so I have to wait outside the door, and the disciples are dull." Daoyan Jizuan said slightly. Then he extended a hand and patted Daoyan Supreme's shoulder. "Come with me somewhere." Daoyan Supreme bowed his head and promised, then followed Jian Wushuang to reach out and flew away into the distance. Under the stars, the invisible avenue flows slowly, and countless lucks regenerate. The divine universe, after the most tragic Holocaust war, is gradually recovering because of the protection of the eternal God. Daoyan Supreme followed Jian Wushuang's behind and kept moving forward. The plane that gave birth to the birth machine and the broken star field are swimming in his eyes, quite a sense of 1,000 years. The more I go to the edge of the divine universe, the stronger the sense of killing is, the burial ground formed after the war of catastrophe. Daoyan Supreme, with Jian Wushuang, finally set foot on the extraterritorial battlefield. Chapter 4678. Feeling the blood of the killing left by his predecessors, an uncontrollable wildness and sadness came to my mind. Looking at the endless, almost corpse road piled up with countless corpses, Rao was shocked by his calm heart. He could hardly imagine what kind of catastrophe happened here. Even the ancestors have fallen. Half an ancestor, Invincible Supreme, half-step invincible supreme. All buried in this, the rich breath of death has become the main tone of the extraterritorial battlefield. Before the word Dao, Yen, he once angered his horse with his clothes, and his sword crossed between the universe of all things. The unimaginable talent of Taoism made him proud of all the heroes. There were also super-denominations who had assassinated him and destroyed the sect by his sword, and some friends swam willingly, but this was the first time he faced the real cruelty above the starry river. Jian Wushuang did not speak, but waved his hand to create a vast scroll. The whole dead and desolate extraterrestrial battlefield seems to be alive, and those miserable corpses have turned into people in the volume. Every one of the characters who used to be very lively gradually woke up. An old beggar with a broken snowflake sword picking up the wine gourd quietly smiled and turned into a sword long river in front of the army. Ba Pao, the ancestral ancestor of the apes who had access to the vault through Baju, had generously died. Ancestor Feng Tian used his death as a chasm to leave fire for the divine universe. Even the eternal God imprisoned the virtual with his body and disappeared together in the chaos of time and space. And countless monks whose names are unknown all died in battles outside the territory. The purest blood and fire constantly impacted Dao Yan's heart. For the first time, he truly felt the tragic, unspeakable sad song. The picture ended with Jian Wushuang and sword broken ancestral source, and everything returned to its original state. Jian Wushuang looked back at him and said softly, "This is what happened millions of years ago." Dao Yan looked sad. The disciple will remember the grace of his predecessors and never forget it. Jian Wushuang smiled and then said, "Go ahead." At the end of the speech, the two figures flew towards the cracks of the two universes. Waving his hand to tear the cracks of the virtual universe, Jian Wushuang stepped into it first. In the star field that has already shattered into nothingness, nearly 100 star-level virtual men endure torn by the wind, standing on the edge of the crack. Seeing that the crack was torn, the vast expanse of the whole body alone was enough to show off the eternal gods who were easily annihilated. All star vassals were desperate, and even the escape action could not be made. A bit of resentment rose in Dao Yan's eyes, and he raised his hand to kill these empties. However, Jian Wushuang prevented Dao Yan by waving his hand. He slowly shook his head and then moved forward. Dao Yan withdrew his palms and gave a cold glance at the nearly Baishu Shi, followed closely by Jian Wushuang. The more than 100 voiders walked around in death. All sweating, they looked at each other, and the highest and oldest voider took a deep breath and said, "Notify the nearest starfield. As far as you can escape, just as far as you can." "But who can escape?" A vacant man with a broken arm smiled abruptly, and then wiped out his own origin, turning into a cup of fly ash. "Yeah, even the false god was killed by him. Who could escape?" Above the endless void sky, Jian Wushuang's figure moves forward slowly. He seems to engrave all the scenes of the universe of the void in his mind. Then millions of virtual men began to rush out of each star field, all looking at Jian Wushuang with despair. Dao Yan Supreme has accumulated divine power and is ready to fight. If there is nothing beside Jian Wushuang's eyes, he can't look at the empty men who have gathered nearly 10 million people under him. As far as he is concerned, even if he doubles again, it is nothing more than just killing. What he has to do now is an unprecedented thing. He wants to change the rules of the avenue of the virtual universe. I don't know how many years have passed. Jian Wushuang came to the center of the void universe, and the Su Shi surrounded under him was boundless. Slowly spit out the avenue rules of the divine universe, Jian Wushuang's sacred Huamang began to restrain himself. Then a breath of solitude and silence began to emerge. The emergence of this breath shocked all the vain men. that's virtual power, represents the virtual power of the virtual universe. With the more and more dark and lonely breath, after reaching a certain threshold, Jian Wushuang's divine pattern has been transformed into a virtual pattern. Dao Yin was also shocked, so shocked that it couldn't be more complex, that the eternal God, who represents the pinnacle of the divine universe and controls the rules of the avenue, can actually practice virtual power. As Jian Wushuang became the imaginary God, and the supreme imaginary force skyrocketed, the avenue rules of the entire imaginary universe were moving towards him. The pupil of Qi Jin had already become completely black, and the prestige was even colder than the imaginary God, which made all the servants feel terrified. They could not believe what was happening in front of them. Jian Wushuang's eyes slowly glanced at the heavens and earth, and then raised his hand to grasp the avenue. The avenue of the virtual universe fell in his hand obediently, flowing slowly. Then he started to modify the rules. Heaven and earth tremble and constantly merge and change. The rules of the avenue contain too much. Everything, practice, heaven, earth, and gods are changing a little bit. In a certain way, Jian Wushuang's perception of Dedeo has already surpassed the ancestor level. With the modification of the avenue rules of the virtual universe, everything gradually became concrete. The destroyed heavens began to reshape, and the virtual power remained, but the associated skills of every virtual warrior in the virtual universe were removed. That kind of disrupted the balance, and the innate virtual explosion was erased from the rules of the Supreme Avenue by Jian Wushuang. It is completely erased and will no longer be able to remain in the bloodstream. Every emptiness felt the changes in his body, and the dantian, which had a special accumulation of emptiness, had disappeared, as if it had never appeared. After Jian Wushuang did all this, Yu read the book www.okanshu.com, and he converted the vast virtual power into divine power. This time his main purpose of coming to the virtual universe was completed. If you do NT completely destroy the virtual universe, you have to achieve a delicate balance with the divine universe. And this balance is to completely remove the virtual explosion from the avenue rules of the virtual universe. In some ways, this is Jian Wushuang's abandonment of the liquidation of the universe. From now on, the defender can't bring down the realm to crush the monk without the defend. At the same time, Jian Wushuang resolutely buried a point of origin in the rules of the avenue of the virtual universe, so that even in a future that is far away and timeless, he can finally shelter the divine universe. I have completed the avenue of the imaginary universe by luck. From then on, the imaginary universe will not be a step forward. The violators will be punished. Chapter 46:79. This last sentence is that Jian Wushuang planted a ban in the avenue as a false god. This is another guarantee. Even if the universe is dead, it will not disappear unless there is a stronger one to rebuild the rules. After doing all of this, Jian Wushuang no longer looked at the universe and skimmed towards the crack. Standing on the edge of the crack, looking back at the heavens, he looked at Tao Yan's supreme road. Remember, your mission is to guard the divine universe. Disciples, remember, will not forget in the end. Tao Yan said with great respect. Jian Wushuang nodded his head, waved his hands with supreme divine power to completely block the crack, and the remaining nearly 100 cracks were completely blocked. This time, the two universes may no longer be connected. The virtual universe wants to grow a virtual god, which will be a long time to no margin. After the cracks were sealed, Jian Wushuang went to a place of sorrow again. He never forgot the place where the divine universe rekindled hope from despair. The burial ground in the mournful land does not have the figure of the old man who stopped. The silence is still there, and countless corpses lie quietly in the place, still alive. became an ancestor. After standing at the pinnacle of the universe, Jian Wushuang was vaguely aware that each of the corpses in this sad land surpassed the existence of the ancestor and did not belong to the divine universe. But it does not belong to the divine universe. Why is it using divine power? This is the most doubtful place of Jian Wushuang. Without finding the figure that stopped, Jian Wushuang finally left. So far, the internal and external troubles of the divine universe have been eliminated, and the era of world clarity has arrived. On the side of Yunshao Palace, in front of the dojo of Shenge, Jian Wushuang lay on his back on the peach tree branch and watched the whole body in a sea of clouds. Xiao Taoxian climbed up and down on him, shaking his nose greedily and sucking the road from eternal God. Dao Yan, who changed into a plain shirt, sat down under the peach tree. Jian Wushuang gave him some mental methods a few days ago, which was of great benefit to breaking through the half-ancestor level. Nine Tribulation King and others are rarely together, dozing together with Jian Wushuang. After the battle of the catastrophe, the divine universe gradually entered the right track. The heavens with the promise of sword warriors congratulated, and the divine power between heaven and earth was filled several times, which was enough to make up for the border between the blue and yellow. And these old guys can finally take a good rest. What are you thinking about? 10 years later, after I saw you coming back from the universe of the void, I lost my soul. On the side of Jian Wushuang, the king of nine tribulations slowly said, "You are too tired, you need to rest. Now, let us forget about the matter of the elder." Jian Wushuang did not speak, and said for a long time, "How do you say, Dao Yan?" The Nine Tribulation King opened his eyes and looked at him, and then said, "He has a calm mind, he is determined, and he has a rare, fearless spirit. Earlier on the way to Tianmen, he resisted the punishment of the other five by himself. The only shortcoming is that it is too rigid." Jian Wushuang smiled, but did not speak. The king of nine tribulations sat up and watched his gaze firmly. "For anyone, you have paid enough for everything. Don't consume yourself. Calm down. Like the god of the earth, guarding here safely and steadily, the divine universe is large enough." Jian Wushuang also sat up from the branch and reached out to carry Xiao Taoxian into the childish arms. Nine Tribulation. I can't stand still like this. The divine universe has been completely out of danger, but everything I want to know is still hidden in the mist. I have to find it. Originally, I thought that standing in the most extreme position would be able to know everything I wanted to know, but now I know that everything is still too early. The Nine Tribulation King frowned slowly. "Are you going to find Lao Zun?" Jian Wushuang nodded and whispered, "Yes, but not just looking for Lao Zun, but also other people. I want to fully understand the so-called ultimate that haunts me." "Where are you going?" "One, maybe a faraway place." "What the is that?" King Jujia said, "Seriously." Jian Wushuang smiled silently, and his eyes became firmer when he looked into the distance. "I want to enter Dian alone." Right in the middle of the vast dojo, there is only one sword at the moment. He sat quietly in the middle of the dojo, and the avenue around him slowly flowed, forming a golden water texture, which was extremely sacred. At the beginning, the conversation with Lao Zun in Yunshao Palace sounded in the ear. The so-called mud tires are, in general, the obsessions of the past, the practice of Fanchen, and all of my own feelings. These three aspects are collectively called. And the first step to enter that great Yen Huan is to cut off the past of the world. Like the echo of the flow of Qingchuan, it turns into the flow of characters. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. He has stood at the top of the universe. The original mortal mud tire has already been transformed into an ancestral body step by step in the breakthrough of the realm. In addition, He is a super perfect chaotic creature. The literal meaning of mud tires is untenable for him. The meaning of mud tires understood by Jian Wushuang is to completely cut off the past self, whether it is spiritual practice or memory. But the past cut off, even the trauma suffered by the ancestors, I am afraid it is difficult to predict. After millions of years of spiritual insights, obsessions, and memories have disappeared, what else can he have left? Could it be that the conditions are so terrible to enter the great Yen? After a short moment of hesitation, Jian Wushuang resolutely performed this ceremony. In an instant, the avenue wailed, and the luck belonging to the ancestors began to madly vent from his body and return to the world. At this moment, all the half-ancestors and the invincible supreme are waking up from the sit-up, incredibly looking at the dojo above the cloud palace. Bloodwave always woke up from Wu Sit, and after feeling this scene, a stump under his feet fell directly to the ground. The king of Nine Tribulation, and others also couldn't believe it, and rushed to the top of Yunshao Palace instantly. However, due to the reason of the prohibition, all the half-ancestors could not get close to them at all, only to watch Jian Wushuang's body gradually dim, and all the ancestors' luck returned to heaven and earth. He is self-explanatory. Sword Wushuang, hurry up. Feng Qi slapped the forbidden enchantment frantically. Do you know what you are doing? That will die. Lung Rushwang's tears dripped from her eyes. As his wife, how could she not feel Jian Wushuang's luck returning to the heavens? Calm like the king of nine robbers, he couldn't calm down anymore. He rushed to Lung Rushuang, flushed his eyes. You are his wife, only you can persuade him. He is destroying his ancestors. Chapter 4680. Lung Rushuang smiled miserably. I respect his decision. The king of Nine Tribulation took a step back and lost his soul. He never thought that Jian Wushuang would resolutely destroy his ancestors in such a fierce way. The supreme luck belonging to the ancestor level is scattered in the world, and it is impossible to gather back. Everything can no longer look back. Master, Daoyan, please stop. Daoyan knelt down to the ground. Daoyan wept. Earth God, why are you? Blood waves always wept. Does the universe you have been sheltering cannot make you nostalgic? Fuck. The old man will go with you. The old blood wave did not hesitate to reach out to destroy the source, but they were held by Long Yen and Long Qi. No, there must be a reason for Jian Wushuang to do this. Otherwise, he has no reason to do so. Feng Qi slowly rose and murmured. At the same time, King Nine Tribulation also recalled his previous conversation with Jian Wushuang. One of the most critical words is Dian Huan. It seems that the king of Nine Tribulation realized that Jian Wushuang's dissipation of ancestors would be related to going to Dayanhuan. The ancestor-level luck was returned to the heavens, and every half-ancestor felt that his own shackles began to loosen. Daoyan Supreme, straight into the half-ancestor. Everyone looked at the gradual faint body with red eyes. In the hazy luck, Jian Wushuang opened his eyes hard, looked at all the old brothers who came out of the sea of the corpse in front of him, smiled slightly, and finally dropped his eyelids. The original thousands of strands of Huameng Avenue were added and finally dispersed in the same way. The ultimate ancestor of the universe no longer exists, and Jian Wushuang himself felt extremely relaxed and ethereal. At the same time, the divine power of the meridian dantian in the body began to dissipate, replaced by an unknown energy. That kind of energy, like clouds and fog, is majestic and magnificent. That is Yin Li. It also belongs to the power of Dayanhuan and is a sign of entering the realm of Yenxian. When such energy is born in the meridian, it burns directly in the meridian. That is, even the soul can't bear the pain. Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes, and behind him gradually began to have a virtual shadow being stripped out. The past, formed by perseverance, mortal practice, and all of your own feelings, has become concrete. The blood of the gods poured out from each pore of Jian Wushuang, and the white shirt was dipped into the blood coat, but he remained silent, peeling off his past little by little from the body. It was the most glorious brilliance, different from the red sun of Dari, shining in the dojo. A mud tire exactly like Jian Wushuang's twins began to take shape. The dojo cracked over a large area, and the clouds shrank. When the big day above the sky reprojected the shining beam, everything fell silent. The blood of the gods dissipated in the air, and the sword in the white shirt was sitting on the spot without any blood. He opened his eyes reluctantly, and then passed out. Behind him, a real image of Ingrun Huameng slowly opened his eyes. The psyche at the beginning of the chaos slowly emerged, and the real shadow of the mud tire began to look at everything in front of him with ignorance. Above the cloud top, everyone rushed forward, cold and frost, like Hug the Sword Wushuang, who passed away. The Jujiao Wang and others were shocked, looking at the real image exactly like Jian Wushuang. "I'm hungry." Mud Tire opened his mouth and looked at everyone. In the next moment, he was lying directly on the top of the cloud, and he was happily enjoying the cloud formed by the pure divine power. "Here, this is Jian Wushuang?" Feng Qi was dumbfounded, looking at the guy who was lying on the clouds without regard to the image and biting the clouds like he was eating cotton candy. "It's delicious, it's delicious." Muddies muttered while eating like a child's heart. Everyone glanced at each other, and then hurriedly welcomed Jian Wushuang into the Yunxiao Palace. As for the real shadow of the mud tire, he was directly carried by the 9 Tribulation King on his shoulder and sent into the Yunxiao Palace. In the Yunxiao Palace, looking at this real shadow that is almost equivalent to Jian Wushuang, everyone looked at each other. No one spoke first, and all looked at him intently. Jian Wushuang has been ushered into the inner hall by Lung Rushuang and Feng Qi and others. Only this Jian Wushuang was sitting on the spot, grinning smirk. In the end, it was the tentative inquiry of the King of 9 Tribulation, "Are you a sword match?" Mud Tires really giggled. "I'm hungry." "What's your name?" "I'm hungry." After a series of questions, I only got the word, "I am hungry." Everyone understands that this guy's intelligence is probably not much better than the baby he was born with. For this guy who is stripped from Jian Wushuang, who is also helpless about this, only when Jian Wushuang wakes up, I am afraid there will be an answer. In the inner hall, the young child was carefully stacking the pieces of ice on the extreme north on Jian Wushuang's body. Feng Qi was sitting on the side of the bed, closing his eyes and realizing his vitality. When she was in Kangwu Taichung before, she had imported most of her Fengzu ancestors into Jian Wushuang's body. In a certain way, Jian Wushuang's physical condition was the most clear except for himself, Feng Qi. The situation of Jian Wushuang at the moment is that Feng Qi is helpless. Today's sword Wushuang is like a completely closed big cocoon that naturally repels divine power. No one can see his condition, only to feel that his breath is stabilizing. "Sister Feng Qi, what's the situation with Wushuang?" Lung Rushuang asked. Feng Qi frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "The breath is stable. At present, there is no harm, but his road. I am afraid that he will never come back. Just survive, no matter what he becomes. I will always be with him." Lung Rushuang firmly said. Feng Qi didn't speak anymore and walked away slowly, his back as if he had grown old for a moment. In the huge inner hall, there is only one sword with no road left. When the last trace of divine power was expelled from his body, that vast expanse of power finally filled up, A mysterious realm is crowned in his body. In the infinite darkness, Jian Wushuang's consciousness seemed to swim in eternal darkness. The extremely strong weightlessness made him extremely uncomfortable. It was like falling indefinitely, the ethereal voice ringing in his ears. Wushuang, you shouldn't listen to me. You will regret this. In the dark darkness of Jian Wushuang opened his eyes and looked subconsciously at the darkness below him. The one that exudes endless darkness is actually a pair of black pupils like black holes. Chapter 46, 81. Lord, Jian Wushuang woke up suddenly, the temples sweating like springs. The pain that burned to the extreme in the meridians of the whole body disappeared, replaced by Sun Lung Niu. He shook his hand. The avenue representing the ancestors had long since dissipated, and luck had been returned to the heavens and the world. From now on, he will have no contact with the entire divine universe. Is everything worth doing to find the ultimate illusion? He asked himself, but no one could give him an answer, and nothing could turn back. Putting on a blue shirt, Jian Wushuang slowly stepped out of the inner hall and came to the main hall of Yunshao Palace. At this time, the 9 robbery kings in the Yunshao Palace, Old Blood, and others all gathered here and did not leave. Seeing Jian Wushuang appeared, they were all stunned, and then all ran over. Earth God, you're fine, everything is fine. Blood wavelength old eyes red, looking at Jian Wushuang very reluctantly. The 9 tribulation kings still seldom spoke, but the concern in his eyes betrayed his expressionless face. Jian Wushuang smiled slightly. It's okay. I can't die for the time being, but I will no longer succeed Essence from today, and Essence will take over from everyone in your presence. No, I don't agree. Blood Waver directly opposed. Unparalleled Palace Master. Eternal God is only you, and only you can be competent. This is not our choice, but the choice made by heaven. We also disagree, Lord Eternal God. Long Yen and Long Qi nodded at the same time. Jian Wushuang smiled. I have returned all my luck to heaven. From today, heaven will make a choice from each of you. After finishing his speech, he raised his hand and returned the ancestor-level atmosphere of Lini Dragon Emperor, who had been deposited earlier to Long Yen and Long Qi, and at the same time, he gave Tiandao Qiyun attached to his unwillingness to leave and gave it to all half-ancestors. At this moment, I was hungry in the silent Yunshao Palace, and then a figure similar to Jian Wushuang appeared. Facing each other, Jian Wushuang waved gently at the real shadow. Then, the real shadow of the mud tire turned into a stream of light and plunged into his palm. The streamer of Huamang is as big as a broad bean, and it moves like a heart in a regular rhythm. What's this? Blood Waves wondered. Jian Wushuang murmured, This is my past. Then he said again, You guys, I'm going to leave for a few days to go to the lower realm. But there are some trivial things. This time, I will go with you. The King of 9 Tribulation said, softly, with a firm tone. Jian Wushuang nodded his head. Walking out of the Yunshao Palace, he finally looked back at the Yunshao Palace that stood in the vastness, and then walked towards the heavens step by step. Has it been decided? Among the heavens and the heavens, the King of 9 Tribulation looked forward. Jian Wushuang nodded. After I send the past to the nether, I am ready to leave. No matter when you come back, you have to remember that we are waiting for you. The King of 9 Tribulation turned around and looked at him. Jian Wushuang smiled, then reached out and patted his shoulder. I know. The divine power universe is vast and infinite, and it encompasses the heavens and the world, but the largest base is still the world with a thin aura. Sitting in the clouds, Jian Wushuang looked at the stream of light in his palm, and the past also surged into his heart. Once the past is put into reincarnation, his memory and obsession for millions of years will also disappear. But Jian Wushuang still resolutely cast it. You don't want to leave him in the Yunshao Palace in order to throw him in the world. The Nine Tribulation King is puzzled. His life is at most hundreds of years, not even a little Dao Yuan have. He said slowly, it's not a bad thing to be able to enter the reincarnation. The Nine Tribulation King shook his head helplessly and then said, let's go. I'll go to the lower realm with you to see where he will go. White House in Chongping County, with the cry of a baby crying, the rainstorm that did not stop for 10 consecutive days was finally closed, and the world was clear. The lanterns inside and outside the Baifu were decorated, and the red lanterns spread for dozens of miles. Every servant was full of joy, and after receiving the reward from the housekeeper, he said that he was safe. The wife who gave birth in November was finally born, and the flood that almost spread throughout the county was also receding, and everyone was surprised. The news that everyone went to Baifu and said a word of mouth could get Shuangxi money spread, and for a time the people were unable to get through the water surrounding the gate of Baifu. At the same time, there were two figures in plain shirts walking in the pavilion of Baifu, but the hurried domestic servants ignored them. Is this kid in reincarnation, or you, or one of your past, one of the rich gods, the youth like a god? Asked. Another young man who was a little thin, but with superb prestige in his eyes, replied, it is me, but not me. After he left my body, he was an independent little guy. The King of Nine Tribulations smiled quietly. Since you said that he is different from your individual existence, how about I give him the fairy root and let him worship me as a teacher? Then even if you leave, Yunshao Palace will be succeeded. No, Nine Tribulation. Jian Wushuang was helpless. As a result, too many hidden problems may have to be exposed. Even if I don't know how to strip him from the body. What is the consequence? It is better to let him be flat, and then stepped into reincarnation. Good, it's all up to you. The King of Nine Tribulation laughed. Who makes you the eternal God? It will not be after today. I think that Dao Yan should be able to do the job of the eternal God. Already decided? Jian Wushuang nodded and looked at him at the same time. And Nine Tribulation, you will be my last card in this universe. Nine Tribulation King nodded slightly, understood. In the conversation between the two, they had walked from the promenade to a box. Entering through the door, there is only one couple in the big room at the moment. Ma'am, you are fortunate. In front of the half-draped bed, a middle-aged man held the woman's palm tightly and said warmly, and the woman smiled and pursed her lips, unfortunately bitter. In the rocking bed wrapped in brocade, a baby with red lips and white teeth was staring at the round eyes, looking curiously at the two figures. The King of Nine Tribulation made a grimace, and then placed his finger on the little guy's forehead. Wipes of gentle power poured into his brain. Since you don't want me to give this little fairy root, then I will let him live long, and live to the age of 500, and his descendants will be stretched free from disease and disaster. The little guy giggled, and the first baby teeth began to grow on the pink gums. Jian Wushuang also smiled, and the crystal tears fell silently from his eyes. Nine Tribulation, let's go. It is good. Chapter 4682. In the 32 years of the scenery, the White House of Chongping County gave birth to a son and died of disease and disaster until he was 527 years old. After thousands of disasters, sometimes it is not a blessing to re-enter samsara. Luodu Starland, which still maintains the broken shape, only has two figures at the moment. The Nine Tribulation Kings stood far away in the void, watching the thin but firm figure move forward step by step. He didn't know when to say goodbye to this difference, but everything was a foregone conclusion and could not be changed. The genius who surprised everyone just left. Jian Wushuang finally looked back at the king of Nine Tribulation, the corners of his mouth slightly curled up, and then he faced the vast, heavenly gate like a galaxy and stepped into it. Bum. Hundreds of millions of gods scattered like a tassel in the sky, and finally completely vanished into nothingness. The king of Nine Tribulation was standing at the same place, but if he was lost, he didn't seem to believe that Jian Wushuang had left. However, there is no breath left by the half-pointed sword Wushuang in the vast, immense divine universe. He seemed to have passed by in the future, and like a passing passenger, and no one knew where he was going. For a long time, the king of Nine Tribulation murmured softly, "Dai Yanhuan? I wrote it down." With the horrible gang wind in the chaos of time and space, Jian Wushuang felt the skin pain from his body almost instantly. He completely cut off the past and stripped out the real shadow of the mud tire. All the ancestors of luck returned to the divine universe. While breaking off the past of the ancestor, he also entered the realm of Yenxian. It was a more mysterious realm, and it was hard to tell even if it was sword warriors who were successfully promoted. But the only time he can be sure at the moment is that Yenxian is a special kind of super ancestral existence. Because of the symbol of Yenxian, Yanli is a supreme energy that is not higher than divine power but has unique growth. Yenxian is also a sign of entering Dayanhuan, but Jian Wushuang's current situation is a bit awkward. Although he has taken that step completely, his strength is still in a weak state, making it difficult to effectively resist the chaos of time and space. Even in the realm of the sword fairy Ding Bai, you have suffered a big loss of time and space by accident. After carefully covering the whole body with force, Jian Wushuang moved forward carefully. He no longer wandered in the chaos of time and space like the headless flies, and there was a weak force pulling him. I do know how many years have gone in the chaos and darkness. Just when Jian Wushuang felt that the lamp was about to dry up, a crack in the Tianmen that exudes an invisible white unappeared in front of him. Without any hesitation, Jian Wushuang stepped directly into it. Almost at the same time, the layers of supreme coercion enveloped him, and the sword that was about to run out of light, Mu Wushuang, where there is still the strength to fight back, passed out directly. History is always very similar. The second time he came to Dayanhuan, Jian Wushuang was as embarrassed as the first time. Severe pain spread throughout the limbs and bones, and then they woke up with cold water. Jian Wushuang suddenly awakened from a faint state, and when he looked into his eyes, he saw that the two little fellows looked at him with a smile. Brightly awakened, and dare to continue to pretend to die? One of the big-breasted big men grinned and pulled out a long black bone whip from his waist. Even when he woke up from a coma, his deep fighting instincts made him almost instantaneously, with a big hand clenching the whip directly, and at the same time, he slapped his hand to the big man. It is conceivable that this terrifying form of Jian Wushuang can surely be easily killed. But then a strange scene appeared. The iron plate with chains engraved in dense patterns between Jian Wushuang's neck suddenly released great power and walked all over his limbs and corpses. Jian Wushuang uttered a pain and fell to his knees directly. The brazen man, whose legs were shaking like sifting chaff, was daunted by the murderous intent from the face and screamed back. At the same time, there was a sudden thunder snake on the dark sky of the dark clouds. The rain fell and washed the ground. Jian Wushuang lay on the ground on his side, and that imprisonment made him unable to breathe. On the ground covered with black and gray coarse soil particles, there are more than 100,000 invisible bodies. While the rain fell from the sky, they all turned up, allowing the rain to wash the body. Everyone's neck is surrounded by a chain of iron plates, imprisoning their souls and bodies. Amidst the sky and rain, a very thin figure came slowly to Jian Wushuang, and then stretched out an arm, directly carrying him on his shoulders and walking towards a huge cave. The heavy rain stopped, and the more than 100,000 figures slowly entered the cave. I don't know how long after that, Jian Wushuang woke up wandering slowly, and it was all gloomy fire when I saw it. Me, where is this? He barely sat up. When he saw nearly 1,000 figures sitting around him, Jian Wushuang froze. How could there be so many people in such a cave? Everyone looked at him with numb and empty eyes, without saying a word. The thin figure who carried him back into the cave looked at him up and down at the moment, and then said quietly, "Sleep, there will be endless work tomorrow, saving you from exhaustion." As his words fell, all of them lay directly on the ground, and the cave became more strangely dead. Slowly pressing down the depression in his heart, Jian Wushuang asked, "Where is this?" "Your cemetery." The thin figure said concisely. Jian Wushuang no longer asked, but tried to peel off the chain iron plate between his necks by hand. However, he only touched slightly, and the supreme power from the chain iron card instantly knocked him out again. Time passed quietly, and when the last light in this huge cave disappeared, everything really died down. "Wake up and get up to work." With a slight push, Jian Wushuang woke up dizzy. At this moment, the sky outside was already brightened, and the people who lived in the cave began to line up towards the exit. The thin figure leaned towards his head, and then strode away. Jian Wushuang slowly got up and followed the team in a muddled manner. Although the sky is bright, there is no trace of the sun shining, and the distant sky is still thick with dark clouds. Dozens of Montenegro that are almost bordering the sky, and more than 100,000 prisoners wearing chain iron tags around their necks are the main colors here. Jian Wushuang is quite certain that the place he reached is Dianhuan, but the scene at the moment could not help but make him suspicious. How did he come to this place, seeming to be a prisoner? Chapter 46:83. Jian Wushuang shook his groggy head hard and began to observe the prisoners in front of him in the same situation. From this point of view, he could not help but be amazed. Every prisoner's state, no one is lower than half an ancestor. What is that concept? Even if it is a tragic battle to the extreme, the total number of half ancestors of the divine universe and the imaginary universe will never add up to more than 30, and some of them are members of the Bite. But right now, the lowest level of these prisoners is actually half ancestor, 100,000 half ancestors. Rao was completely shocked by Jian Wushuang's concentration. Is this the characteristic of Dianhuan? Even the prisoner state has reached such a point that Jian Wushuang dares not imagine what a terrible existence there is in this great Yanhuan. After taking a deep breath and forcing down the inner shock, Jian Wushuang again looked at the Montenegro nearest to him. A total of more than 100,000 prisoners were directly divided into 10 teams, and the team with tens of thousands of units of measurement was like a long line of marching into different Montenegro. Jian Wushuang's team is heading to the largest Montenegro. As he was about to enter the huge mine mouth, he saw hundreds of figures in black robes walking around. Somehow, when they saw them, Jian Wushuang always had a feeling of déjà vu. But he couldn't help but look closely. The prisoner behind him pushed him forward. Entering the mine channel, like an abyss, there is no darkness in imagination, but a dim purple color reflects the whole mine channel like a dream. Jian Wushuang noticed that the hazy purple meaning flashed from a kind of purple sand distributed in the mine. With the deepening of the team, this team of more than 10,000 in total appeared insignificant in the deep belly of Montenegro. At the same time, Hundreds of guards in black robe divided the team into more than 100. In this 100-member team, where Jian Wushuang is located, led by the Guardian, he entered one of the most extensive mines. It's not a coincidence that you came here and you are about to step into death. A flicker of teasing flashed in the eyes of his thin body, walking side by side. Be prepared. Jian Wushuang just wanted to speak, and a huge black whip pulled directly towards his thin body, snorted him, and the blood randomly oozed out of his chest. The black robe guardian, who was at the front of the team, turned around and looked at Jian Wushuang coldly, and then continued on, looking at the guardian of the half-ancestor level. The sword had no double-faced and no expression, and then turned to whisper, "What do you mean by what you just said?" "Bait, it's all bait." Gently gritted his teeth. "His mother, as long as I can't die this time, sooner or later they will peel them." "Bait." After Jian Wushuang repeated several times in the bottom of his heart, he vaguely guessed what would happen next. The more the mind tunneled shrouded in voluptuousness, the hotter it was. Until it reached the end, Jian Wushuang suddenly saw that the depth of the heart of Montenegro was empty. Countless stone-like, huge black vines are densely covered on the stone wall, and it seems to be awake at any time. At the same time, the stone walls around these black vines are densely covered with countless special purple crystals. The black robe guardian standing at the forefront slowly turned around, watching the 100-person team say in a deep voice, "Jump down." However, no one stepped forward. It seems that this situation has already been expected. The black robe guardian directly waved the black bone long whip in his hand, scrolled nearly 20 people, and threw it under the abyss. At the next moment, the most shocking scene appeared. The dark black vines that had been attached to the stone walls slowly awakened, like a series of giant pythons. Among all the prisoners who saw this scene retreated subconsciously, shaking their bodies like sifting chaff. However, the black-robed guardian smiled coldly, and at the same time his body retreated, he blocked all the return passages with great force. At the same time, a giant python-like vine appeared quietly in front of the less than 100 prisoners. Boom! The muddy black vines darted forward and swept the prisoner halfway through. Jian Wushuang's eyebrows are tightened, and the abyss is at his feet. The thin figure on his side glanced at Jian Wushuang, and then he leaned forward to the dark vines that hung across the air. The rest of the prisoners followed him, leaping their teeth. Jian Wushuang thought a little and also jumped. The foot is as hard as a rock. With a little force under the foot, the rubble will fall. Is this kind of thing actually a living creature? Jian Wushuang secretly thought in his heart, and at the same time began to consider how to get out. The trauma he suffered in the chaos of time and space has long been recovered, and his internal strength has reached its peak. However, the chain iron plate between the necks, like the rules of the avenue, restrained the strength of the meridian in his body. Today's Jian Wushuang. Its strength is even difficult to reach even the ancestor level. The only thing that made him somewhat relieved was that his own sword intention and ancestral supernatural powers could still be used. There was not much problem with self-protection for the time being, running between the vines. The danger is not weaker than before. Each one is enough to wield the vines that half an ancestor class easily wiped out like a tentacle. However, under these circumstances, there are already fewer than 10 prisoners of nearly 200 people. Persevere. As long as you insist that the rest of you go down the pothole, we will have a life. I don't know when the thin body-shaped Shen Sheng appeared on the side of Jian, Wushuang reminded. Follow me. I will protect you from death. Jian Wushuang smiled quietly. Keep your own life first and talk about other things. You don't believe me? The thin figure stared. Jian Wushuang said again, Faith is natural faith, but no one can guarantee it here, is it? The thin figure didn't speak anymore. After looking at Jian Wushuang, the figure was like a ghost and disappeared into the vines. And Jian Wushuang also focused on avoiding the vine offensive. When the last scream came to an abrupt halt, Yu read the book WWW. Okanshu, calm, above the entire abyss, only two people remained. One is Jian Wushuang, and the other is naturally that thin figure. Although he can't see his realm on today's occasions, Jian Wushuang can vaguely feel that the thin body shape is by no means an ordinary half-ancestral figure. The two stared at each other, then nodded tacitly. Jian Wushuang then asked, "How long will it last?" The thin figure slowly raised a finger. "1 day. No, it's a year." "What a year?" The thin figure smiled strangely. "Only after this big guy eats and drinks and falls into a deep sleep, they will let the rest of the team to mine. Then the best time for us to escape." Chapter 46-84. Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows. "It sounds like you are very experienced." "Naturally, this is not the first time I did this," said the thin figure. "However, you don't seem to panic at all. It's somewhat unexpected. Panic is of no avail. It's better to think about how to leave next." Jian Wushuang looked around and said in a deep voice, "I advise you not to think about it. Even if you are Yen Xian, there is no possibility of escaping from here." The thin figure whispered, as if he had tried all the methods he could think of. Jian Wushuang no longer spoke, but looked at the dark abyss below him. "I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Chuanqiu. What's your name?" Picked a very remote corner and leaned down easily. "Sword Wushuang," he said concisely. The thin figure named Chuanqiu raised his eyebrows and stopped talking. The muddy black vines, who seemed unwilling to spur the wrath of two fishes for the net, stopped twitching, and the whole abyss fell into a strange silence. A touch of gold rushed from the corner of Jian Wushuang's eyes, and at the same time, the 4 seasons of Tai Luo Kendo quietly covered the entire abyss. "Jian Wushuang, have you heard anything?" Chuanqiu raised his head vigilantly. Jian Wushuang's eyebrows were slightly twisted, and the next moment he screamed, "Run!" However, everything was too late. The surrounding stone walls burst at the same time, and countless giant python-like black vines swarmed out and squeezed towards the two. Because Jian Wushuang had already released the field vigilance, he leaped into the air while the vines squeezed, barely avoiding it. When Chuanqiu responded, it was too late to be dragged directly into the abyss by the vines. "Sword Wushuang, this guy?" Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, turned directly, and suddenly rushed into the depths of the abyss. The Yen Li Huamang appeared in his eyes, allowing him to penetrate the darkness easily. The further down, the more vine-like vines accumulate, the denser they are, and almost no space at the bottom of their feet. The body shape of Chuanqiu didn't know where, waved his hand to call out the invisible sword, and the immense breath of the unparalleled swordsman rushed and raged. Perhaps it was because of the crisis that dozens of vines were heading upstream. Jian Wushuang lifted the sword and broke it. The immense strength makes every style of Wushuang Kendo easily reach the top. Although he is bound, his arrogant sword is easily torn apart. At this time, chunkiest, extremely thin figure also appeared in Jian Wushuang's eyes. Waving his sword to cut off the vines that bound him, Jian Wushuang's nose and mouth gushed with blood. "Are you all right?" he asked breathlessly for the rest of his life. Jian Wushuang did not answer, directly grabbed his collar, ready to leave here. At the next moment, countless vines ganged on top of their heads, blocking the way. "Damn, does this thing have long eyes?" Chuanqiu sighed in a low voice, and a breath of breath also emerged from his body. Ancestor level. Jian Wushuang looked sideways at this, but then looked at the abyss. Never like passive sword Wushuang, directly released the first form of Xinggehe Jianyani, Xing. The The vast expanse of strength condensed the supreme sword, swept across the abyss in a vertical and horizontal manner, as if poured into boiling oil in the water. A complete shock erupted. Yanli sublimated the entire Wushuang Kendo to another level. Even at the ancestor level, Jian Wushuang also confidently struck the town. Under the supremacy of the sword, the vines shattered over a large area, and human-like wailing resounded beneath the abyss. The spring and autumn on the side swallowed the throat incredulously. These are living in the depths of the Black Mountain, with vines and earth-breaking vines. It is difficult to deal with it, even if Yanxian arrives here. But at the moment, it was completely destroyed by this guy who had entered the mountain for the first time, which was really terrifying. Since he has such strength, how could he be caught here? A series of question marks exploded in Chunkius' mind, but there was no answer. Almost at the same time that Jianni dissipated, Jian Wushuang was shocked and went directly into the depths of the abyss. Chuanxiu stunned, and then followed his teeth. The invisible sword in the hand cut off the vines, and a pair of eyes swelled with the shrewd pattern seemed to see the real behind-the-scenes gaze, and suddenly threw the long sword in his hand. Zhang! There was a sound of gold and iron fighting, and at the same time a dark figure stared at Jian Wushuang in a very dark place, and he wanted to leave. Want to go? Jian Wushuang snorted, and a small Quan Tianmen appeared, and he ran directly to the dark figure. Despite the transformation from divine power to diffractive power, the purest divine pattern has not changed. The palm of the colorful Huameng came down, reflecting the dark body without hiding place. Only then did the two see what the dark body looked like. The long and ugly face of the skin of a 10-year-old tree may be due to long-term survival in a very dark place, and the eyes are severely degraded as the size of green beans. And those python-like vines are the black hair. In the eyes of Chuanxiu, there was a disgust in his eyes. Sure enough, he likes blood-sucking, and no one looks worthy of the audience. There was no suspense suppressing him in the palm of his grandeur, but Jian Wushuang was not easy either, and another ray of blood poured out of his mouth. Forced to use the force of force, the chain of iron chains between the necks exuded, the imprisonment deepened. Spring and autumn became more nervous. I said, Jian Wushuang, are you really okay? It is not suitable to stay here for a long time. I think we might as well leave quickly. Jian Wushuang did not speak, staring down at him. The dark figure was revealed only after the divine light emanating from the Tianmen gate of the power realm completely dissipated. Although his robe was mostly broken, he didn't hurt his origin at all. Perhaps it was tempting to find out that Jian Wushuang could do no harm to him. Two green bean-sized eyes dripped, and his whole figure rose in response to the storm, turned into his true nature, and swallowed them in two. Beyond the ancestor level, the power of Yen Xian belongs to the deep sea, roaring and swallowing. The face of spring and autumn is like earth. The 3 souls and 7 souls are almost scared out. Only the sword Wushuang Yuran was not afraid. The invisible sword appeared in his hand, and there was no fancy sword stabbed out. This mediocre sword, but it can be turned upside down and shaken, is a sword independent of Wushuang Kendo. It is the most popular sword of sword fairy Ding Bai. After a sword, it is 100,000 sword. Hundreds of thousands of swords and ons together broke through the extremely dark and poured on the dark body of Yen Xian. The pride in the eyes of the two Hmong beings was not even revealed, but was replaced by panic. How can a sword of repression that belongs to the mysterious realm be used by him? But this sword is indeed completely used, just like Ding Bai's help. Chapter 46:85. It was shocking, but it was like tears and tears silent. Hundreds of thousands of absolute swords, puncturing the sword in the chest with a black body. The unimaginable power directly exploded his entire body into powder. Spring and Autumn were shocked beyond recollection and took an unconscious step back. A sword was made. Jian Wushuang did not relax at all and watched the center of martyrdom with vigilance. Immediately afterwards, the dark body that was blown into powder was slowly condensed, and an unprecedented breath rushed up. The abyss of the entire hinterland of Montenegro has begun to boil. The black figure was condensed, and a pair of mung beans flashed with rage in the small eyes. With a sudden wave of his hand, hundreds of vines engulfed by the force of gravity swept through. Chuanxiu was shocked and said anxiously, "Sword Wushuang, hurry away." The words fell, and hundreds of vines formed a prison cage to directly put the two into it. At the same time, the vines began to secrete mucus quickly, ready to digest them. Chuanxiu reached out and turned over. A dagger appeared in the palm of his hand, and then poked fiercely under the vine. However, the vines didn't move, but because of the excessive force, the dagger split his palm into a deep bone wound. Spring and Autumn took a breath of air, looking at Jian Wushuang. Due to excessive casting, the power of imprisonment in the chain iron plate between the necks almost shattered the spirit of Jian Wushuang. The dynamism in the body is being eaten up by the chain iron brand at a very fast speed. Jian Wushuang reached out his hand to brush away the blood at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were still indifferent. Then the invisible sword trembles in his hand like a trickle of dynamism, which turns into more than a dozen slashes, chopping towards the vines. Laugh. If the hot knife gets into the butter, the vines under the feet will be cut open with a big odor. Then Jian Wushuang directly picked up Chuanxiu and escaped from the cage. The roar of extreme anger shouted, and the black figure stared at the two men with viciousness. Whoever makes you the most inferior prisoner dare to rebel against this seat. Now come obediently and let this seat bite you, but it's better than turning you into an innocent soul. Chuanxiu immediately spit out a spit, disdainful. It's you alone? Now, let's let us out honestly. I can spare you. At this moment, Jian Wushuang suddenly reached out to support Chunkia's shoulders, and his figure was crumbling. Spring and Autumn saw a sudden change in his appearance. Thinking about it was dragging the sword Wushuang back quickly. The dark figure smiled sullenly. The robe sleeve turned over, a muddy black flag rose in response to the storm, and countless devoured prisoners scrambled out. Every wave of that small flag, resembling a phoenix streamer, was like a puff surging like a prison. The sword of Wushuang, which was still at the last moment, was weakened at the moment, which made the Spring and Autumn that uttered madness terrified. While dragging him back, he released Yanli and tried to block. But the power of Yen, which belongs to Yen Fairyland, is really terrifying, almost swallowing up the Spring and Autumn offensive almost instantly. The face of Spring and Autumn looks like earth, and it is about to be folded here. The swordless Wushuang around him is a ghost. The clown jumps. At the next moment, a kind of indescribable expression, which was purely to the ultimate power, rose up. Jian Wushuang changed his previous fatigue, and his figure was standing in the void, looking at the dead soul like Yuan without fear. Then palm your hand forward and hold it. The most dazzling huamang appeared in Tianmen as countless rounds of blazing sun illuminate the abyss of the hinterland of Montenegro. Under this kind of brilliance, the gloomy soul that lived in black light began to twist and wailing. Countless gods and shadows are intertwined with each other, forming a side to cover the sky, and the palm sinking down. The stone walls of Montenegro are unable to withstand that kind of power and began to crack in a large area. A scene like the end appears, the mountain is cracked, and even the plank road with artificial construction collapses together. Just like the mountains and rivers fall down, a brain is broken Seeing the dark figure of the flag streamer, his small eyes flicked around, knowing that he was hit by a hard stubble, but even if his figure flashed, he was ready to escape. However, wherever the daylight is exposed, it seems that a layer of invisible enchantment has risen, intercepting all the breath in it. The black body was horrible. It was a matter of life and death. He no longer dared to hide himself. His arms flew for a while, and his surging power turned into a dark light of tens of thousands. However, Jian Wushuang just raised his hand and waved, and the black light would be wiped out in Tianmen-ji. The energy of light and darkness swelled, and the dark figure could no longer calm down, and madness generally urged the supreme supernatural power to hit the guy like a monster. But those great supernatural powers disintegrated themselves before they even touched Jian Wushuang. Only the far-sighted spring and autumn festival can really see all the offensive of the black body is resolved by the Hua Meng issued by Jian Wushuang himself, and he does not even need to show his hands. This is terrible. This guy is afraid that even one emperor is difficult to check and balance. Covering the palm of the sky, it is a world of its own, and finally it is completely covered in the dark body. The wailing sound was resounding, and the endless black light escaped. Jian Wushuang looked at this scene calmly, from beginning to end. After GD and Wu Guang dissipated together, he stretched out his hand and held it in the air, as if he had already expected what was about to happen, and grabbed a thick mass of black mans. "Release, let me go." The full-bodied black mang struggled violently in Jian Wu's hands, and soon showed a near-nothing figure. The black body that had been frightened, and his strength was destroyed, barely kept a breath. "Leave me alone. All my treasures will be yours." The black body mourned, and at the same time, all the treasures containing great power were taken out of his arms and presented to Jian Wushuang. Aquarius gourd, octagonal, black bronze mask, etc. Just a little sweep. Jian Wushuang will understand this piece of treasure, and even weaker than the extreme ancestors in the divine universe. But be aware that the Ji-Dao ancestors only have 7 handles, and this guy is now pulling out a dozen pieces of supreme treasures that are not much different. Rao Yijian's concentration has been slightly shaken. "As long as you let me go, these are all yours." The black body trembled. However, Jian Wushuang just glanced at him coldly, and the palm was suddenly forced, and the black source was fragmented in an instant. The inky figure didn't even have time to start begging for mercy, and then completely disappeared. Beyond the ancestral level of Yanxian realm, he died in the hands of Jian Wushuang. This is also the first Yanxian who died in his hands. As the dark body disappeared, the entire Tongtian Black Mountain lost its essence, eventually collapsed completely, and countless stones fell. Spring and autumn, coming back from the shock, waved his hand to hold a space, blocking the stones. "Hurry on, this whole mountain is about to collapse." Chapter 46, 86. Jian Wushuang slowly turned around, and the hundreds of strands of imprisoned power spreading from his neck, and the dark blue gloss almost covered half of his face. Spring and autumn took a breath. The chains between the necks of each prisoner contained the power of imprisonment that was terrible. Even Yanxian could not bear the pain. The power of imprisonment caused by Jian Wushuang was something he had never seen before. How much willpower will it take to endure this pain? After finally glancing at him, Jian Wushuang passed out. Spring and autumn rushed forward, reaching for the sword Wushuang, and holding it up. When he was about to flee, he glanced at the dozen treasures scattered in the void, and then took the treasures away with a wave of sleeves. Avoiding the boulders that came down from the sky, Chuanxiu carried the sword in the spring and autumn, just like the agile mountain ape, shuttled in front of the broken stone layer. And because the whole Tongtian Montenegro collapsed so fast, nearly 10,000 prisoners remained, falling directly into the abyss with the broken mine. The black robe guardian was so frightened by the situation that he had been scared, and he almost turned around and fled when the Montenegro collapsed completely. "Hello, just leave?" A faint voice rang from behind, and the guardian slowly turned around. I saw that at the end of the crumbling mine, two figures stood side by side, and one of them had a half face covered with dark blue on pattern, but just raised his hand and took him directly. Chuanxiu raised a dagger at the right time and ruthlessly entered the guard's heart. The cooperation between the two is simple and neat, and everything is completed instantly. Then Jian Wushuang raised his hand like throwing garbage, throwing the deceased watchman into the abyss. "Go away." Spring and Autumn promised to pick him up and shuttle directly in the broken mine. Boom. The most magnificent, towering Montenegro collapsed from within. Almost at the same time, in a cloudless and gigantic hall, a figure reclining on the bed quietly opened his eyes, and an unparalleled golden gleam emerged. Report to the little emperor. The next 3 days of Montenegro collapsed. When Montenegro collapsed completely, an embarrassed figure broke open and rushed out. Seeing the light, how long the joy of the rest of the life remained after the robbery, hundreds of black-robed guards ran directly from all sides. Looking at more and more guards, Chunkius' eyes turned upwards, and he just passed out. However, no one cared about the two prisoners, and all flew towards the collapsed ruins of Montenegro, and I wondered what to do. Damn, how could this Montenegro collapse? One of the oldest watchmen exasperated. With the protection of Lord Mountain Spirit, there is no possibility that this Montenegro will collapse. Is Lord Mountain Spirit already? It's impossible. Lord Shanling is Yen Xian. Even if the little emperor comes, I'm afraid it can't be taken seriously. The noisy sound resounded, and nearly 1,000 guards in black robe were helpless. The collapse of Montenegro is by no means a trivial matter, and if the little emperor blames him, no one can afford it. The elders frowned, then crossed the crowd and looked at the two figures collapsed on the ground. "Bring it down. Interrogate carefully." Spring and Autumn eyes slightly opened a slit and then continued to play faint. Confused, the two of them were thrown into a prison by being wrapped around. When they left, Chuanxiu sat up directly from the ground and took care of the sword. At the moment, Jian Wushuang, his eyes closed, a stream of steaming sweat turned into mist rising from his body, and the imprisoned force covering half of his face began to fade. Chuanxiu hesitated a little, then wiped it from his arms and took out a dark amethyst stone the size of a thumb to be stuffed into Jian Wushuang's mouth. However, I never thought that Jian Wushuang, who was in a coma, quietly opened his eyes, and his eyes with a heavy sense of prestige shocked Chunkius' hands, almost throwing the spar away. Are you okay?" Chuanxiu said intermittently. Jian Wushuang didn't open his mouth, reached for the spar in his hand, and stuck it in his mouth without thinking. The spar entrance is directly transformed into pure and surging force, quickly repairing the broken meridian. Seeing his gradual recovery, Chuanxiu finally breathed a sigh of relief. "It's okay, nothing is fine." "Where is this place?" Jian Wushuang turned around and asked. "Prison, a place where prisoners who make mistakes are temporarily held, and we will go out soon." Chuanxiu seemed familiar with this. Jian Wushuang nodded his head, and then looked at the chain iron plate between his necks. In the dark, he always felt that the lines on the iron plate were familiar, but he couldn't think of where he had seen it. "I advise you not to use brute force to destroy this thing. Even Yen Xian can't do anything about it." Chuanxiu kindly reminded. Through his statement, Jian Wushuang suddenly recalled that when he had no intention of breaking into Dianhuan, the AZ monster he encountered and the Qinghuan woman also had such an iron medal on their necks. Will these iron cards be the same? Thoughts were a little confused. Jian Wushuang felt very speechless. entering Daanhuan for the first time, he lay directly in the barren land for nearly 600,000 years. This time he made all preparations, but directly became a prisoner of rank. What kind of is really unfriendly? In order to make sure that he did not come to the wrong place, Jian Wushuang asked about Chuanxiu around him again. Chuanxiu heard that and looked at him with a smirk, and then said, "I said, brother, we are not in Daanhuan. Can we succeed in nothingness? To be precise, we are now in the 3 days under Desai." 3 days under the big domain. Jian Wushuang was at a loss. Looking at the bewilderment in his eyes, even spring and autumn were a little helpless, explaining the so-called Desiu is just a realm among the countless realms. There is no special meaning. You just need to know that you are being prisoners in captivity will do. Speaking of it back, judging from the fact that you killed Na Yenxian in the Montenegro before, I don't believe they can catch you. Strong curiosity appeared on Chunkia's face. Could it be the emperor? In which realm? Jian Wushuang shook his head. From the moment he opened his eyes in Daanhuan, he became what he is now, and then he went into the mountains and mines non-stop, killing Yenxian. After this series of things came down, it seemed that there were big hands in him, pushing him forward. How to get rid of the prisoner's identity, and this, Jian Wushuang pointed to the chain between his necks. It's very simple, Chuanxiu grinned. Escape from here, or kill the little emperor. Kill the little emperor. Jian Wushuang repeated it in the bottom of his heart. When he was about to ask again, Chuanxiu spoke again. If you, like me, used to be one emperor, then you can only leave here by destroying the emperor. Chapter 46:87. Jian Wushuang leaned in front of the haystack and said, "I'm not the emperor, you said, but Yu Yan." Chuanxiu didn't say much. After giving a smile, he stopped talking. "Why did you become a prisoner? Because of what you got here?" Jian Wushuang turned to look at him. Because of the defeat, Chuanxiu did not conceal and said slowly, "My father used to be an emperor but died in the war. Although I was the emperor, I was saved from the slaughter, but I also became a prisoner of the ranks. It's a pleasure to come. Do you know how many years my appearance has been?" Chuanxiu laughed at himself. "Even the birth and death of the galaxy in the world. I don't know how many reincarnations have begun. I want to leave here all the time, but in the end it is nothing but luxury." Jian Wushuang did not speak, and the chain of imprisonment between his necks was difficult to lift. This fundamentally limited his ability greatly, and he might die if he was not careful. So he can't do anything now, can't say, wait for the time. Time passed, and a few days later, a few hurried footsteps suddenly sounded in the dead prison. Then nearly 10 black robes appeared. Jian Wushuang, who is slowly restoring Yan Li, just glanced a little at a glance and learned that there were at least 2 ancestors among these nearly 10 people. One of the thin old men took a step forward, and after glancing at him and Chuanxiu, he immediately raised his palm and grabbed them. Jian Wushuang's eyes flicked, and at the same time his palms flew away, and the ethereal force directly offset the palm print of the dry and thin old man. There was a shock in the eyes of the dry and thin old man, and then he took a deep breath and said, "Are you going to kill?" Jian Wushuang glanced at him calmly, then got up and walked out slowly, followed by Chuanxiu. As he was escorted away from the prison, Jian Wushuang looked into the vast square. And in front of the vast square, there is a simple bronze giant hall located in the clouds and smoke. And the clouds and smoke are various scenes, which is quite mysterious. Walking forward, Jian Wushuang at this time was like a mighty emperor without any consciousness as a prisoner. The dry and thin old man was quite angry about this. But judging from the confrontation just now, this little emperor designated the person he wanted to see. By no means he could compete. Chuanxiu, who was right behind Jian Wushuang, looked up at the bronze giant palace, and the slightly wrinkled eyes flickered, and the hatred flashed away, then calmed down again. The huge bronze gate that opened up to 100 feet deeply opened, and hundreds of clouds of smoke flew out, turning into chasing birds, and the cloud butterfly hovered in front of everyone. In the depths of the giant hall, a figure dressed in extravagant clothes, half leaning on the bed, looked out of the hall door. Facing each other, the extravagant figures slowly rose, with long hair hanging down to the ground, the faces of boys and girls, the unspeakable charming and charming. "Welcome to the Emperor's bedroom, everyone." He raised his eyebrows and raised his arms slowly. "Have seen the little Emperor." More than 10 black-robed guards knelt down and knelt. With a light wave of his hand, the extravagant figure known as the little Emperor said softly, "Go ahead, no one is allowed to step further without my order." A crowd of black robes responded, and then withdrew from the hall in full. Staying barefoot, the little Emperor stretched lazily, and walked slowly. With each step he moved, an identical real image emerged from behind him, and there were already dozens of real images in the originally empty and dead palace. Strong and extreme dynamism fills every space. Looking at the more and more figures in front of him, Jian Wushuang's pupils moved slightly, and he could feel that all the real shadows were the realm of Yanxian. This little emperor's strength is unfathomable. Even he feels a sense of inexplicable crisis. A total of nearly 100 true images are close together, and a strong fragrance with a faint smell is coming. "Newcomer, do you know where I am?" Zhenying climbed around Jian Wushuang and asked. Spring and Autumn, who stepped back a few steps, was dreadful, and the dagger was already clenched in his palm. Jian Wushuang was as immobile as the mountains, just closed his eyes for a moment, then suddenly opened his eyes, just like crossing mountains and rivers for 1,000 years. The eyes were far apart, and the little emperor smiled quietly, then applauded, and hundreds of true shadows were all the same. "It's really a bit of a skill, but why haven't I seen you before?" Xiaodigen smiled, and then looked at the spring and autumn behind him. "Hey, I've seen you, son of Fenghua Emperor, spring and autumn." Spring and autumn's complexion changed drastically, and resentment spread across his face. The right hand holding the dagger suddenly snapped out, and the powerful Yanli directly pierced the emperor's heart. The corners of his mouth curled up a little, and he stood there in no way. At the next moment, a layer of undulating ripples wafted in the space, and a thin figure hidden under the purple robe emerged. At the same time, a stronger and more powerful force directly destroyed Chunkius' offensive, all of which hit him. Chuanxiu groaned. His figure fell for dozens of feet, and he slammed into the bronze giant door. Before he barely stopped, arcana scattered all over the place. The little emperor's face was solidified. How could he not know what was the treasure that was scattered from Chunkius' arms and just go through the sky, and all the treasures scattered on the ground would fall into his hands? "This is Yanxian under the Black Mountain was killed by you." Little Emperor's face sighed, and he waved his hands to kill spring and autumn. However, at this time, Jian Wushuang Kuei suddenly stood in front of Chuanxiu and said softly that Yanxian was killed by me, and it has nothing to do with him. The little emperor withdrew his palms as if nothing had happened, carrying his hands and turning to walk slowly. "The spirit who guards the Black Mountain, for Yanxian realm, I really want to know, how do you kill him when you have a chain?" Suddenly raging force in the hall of death and silence, the thin body of the purple robe moved and waved directly at Jian Wushuang. Mastering the strength of Howding, there is no spillover, and even the air has not swept, but the terror power contained in it makes Jian Wushuang not dare to carelessly, and directly urges the strength to resist. The seemingly indifferent palm directly knocked him back a few feet away, and the raging power dissipated. the blood that was tumbling in Ninja's body. When Jian Wushuang was about to fight again, the thin purple robe closed and turned and followed behind the little emperor. It's a bit of a skill. No wonder he can kill Yan Xian with imprisonment. The little emperor turned slowly, his eyes flowing. But you need to know that Haitian Yan Xian is my competent man. You killed him by breaking my arm. What should I do with this account? Jian Wushuang did not speak, but his internal strength has been adjusted to the peak. If he fights in the next riot, he has the confidence to be able to inflict little damage on the little emperor. Chapter 46-88. Perhaps it was Gu Jianwushuang's intention that Xiaodaijin smiled secretly. But I am happy today, Xiaodaijin, and saved you two's death sins. But death sins are exempt, and living sins cannot escape. Just punish you two to go to Wanyushan and get rid of some trouble for me. How? Jian Wushuang fixed his eyes on him, did not speak. If you get rid of those troubles, I will not only save you from death, but also give you a free body. At that time, this chain of imprisonment will be lifted by myself. Chuanxia was stunned on the spot for a moment. Then he could redeem his freedom. And the temptation to him was too great. He no longer knows how many times he has been a prisoner, and even the Milky Way above the Sky Dome has been extinguished several times. The day of mining in the Black Mountain day after day has caused him the utmost pain. He also thought about the source of self-destruction, but the chains of confinement between his necks prevented him from committing suicide. But now, when hope comes up, Chuanxiu is reluctant to give up and looks at Jian Wushuang, almost crazy. As time passed slowly, Xiaodaijin seemed to be in no hurry to receive a reply, and leaned back on the Chinese bed again to close his eyes and recuperate. For a while, Jian Wushuang's voice sounded, "Okay, I should get off." Wise. Little Emperor quietly opened his eyes and played with the taste, then set off immediately. In the next 3 days, there will never be a sky dome shining by the sun, just as the prisoners could not see the end of the years. When that closed enclave appeared in Jian Wushuang's eyes, dozens of figures stopped in the void, putting a snow-white big cloak. Little Emperor and Jian Wushuang stood side by side, throwing him something at hand. This inverted mirror is used for communication between you and us. If you get rid of a trouble, you will reflect them in the mirror. I will know. Remember what I said. I want this whole Wanyushan to be completely wiped out. Receiving the mirror, Jian Wushuang looked at him. It's better to remember your commitment. After the words, Jian Wushuang did not stay any longer and took Chuanxiu to step into the enchantment. In the dim sky, the little emperor smiled. Your Highness, why did you let him enter the world of 10,000 eyes? Even if I didn't want to fight in it, he went in fearing that he would die for a lifetime. The thin purple robe, who had always stood behind him, finally said. The little emperor said, "For me, he is a variable. I do NT allow any variable. This is just a test. If he does NT pass, he will naturally die in the world of 10,000 eyes and save a lot of trouble. If he passed, it would be a better thing for me. It is possible to kill the Black Mountain Yan Xian with the chain of imprisonment. I am afraid that his strength is never under you, but I am very curious. How did he appear among the prisoners?" "Ma'am, I must find out who caught him back later." Xiaodaijin narrowed his eyes narrowly. "If he is one emperor, then I will keep him." The purple robe nodded, and then dozens of figures disappeared. At this moment, Wushuang, the sword traveling through the dark enchantment, looked into the distance with his eyes and looked at everything. In the previous conversation with Chuanxiu, Jian Wushuang knew this Feng Xianqi realm, but it was just a drop of the sea in Dianhuan. The entire territory was built in 6 days. The next 3 days were the prisoners' gathering place, responsible for mining the amethysts in the Black Mountain. The remaining 3 days were named Zaigyushin, Degyushin, and Wanmushin, which was about to enter. The person who is in full control of the entire 6-day realm is the charming little emperor, and the whole territory of the 6 magnificent heavens was also the jurisdiction assigned to him by his emperor. Jian Wushuang is naturally not very interested in these things. At present, what he needs to do most is to enter the world of 10,000 eyes, kill the trouble everywhere, and exchange for a free body. The dark enchantment is not so prolonged. It flew with all its strength for more than half a day, and Jian Wushuang stepped into it step by step. Looking around, the endless red sand is the main color of the entire Wanmushin. The wind whimpered and rolled a huge amount of red sand. Jian Wushuang waved an enchantment with his hand and blocked the wild sand. Although the strength of the entire Wanmu Tianzhong is abundant, there are too many impurities in it, which is obviously not suitable for absorption, which increases the difficulty invisible. Spring and autumn with a swollen nose and blue face followed Jian Wushuang's body, fearing that she would encounter a big crisis when walking slowly. Immediately afterwards, Chuanxiu stopped him again, and then took out more than 10 treasures from his arms. Jian Wushuang's true look. These treasures are exactly what Yanxian has under the Montenegro. Isn't it all taken away by the little emperor? Chuanxiu grinned. He just took 7 or 8 pieces, and more than a dozen pieces are naturally with me. You can choose a few self-defenses and talk better than nothing. Jian Wushuang also did not shirk, and directly selected a delicate thumb jade gourd, an octagonal rung, and half a black bronze mask. After putting the jade gourd and black copper mask in his arms, he directly used this octagonal rung. Immerse a drop of divine blood into the center of the rung, and then throw it in the air. The octagonal rung directly transforms into a body exactly like Jian Wushuang. Although the puppet released by this is only nearly 60% of its strength, Jian Wushuang is still more satisfied with the effectiveness of this octagonal fusee. After all, there is an extra helper, which greatly increases the vitality in these 10,000 days. Judging from the performance of the little emperor, the situation in the 10,000 eyes heaven is by no means optimistic. I am afraid that the so-called troubles will far exceed Jian Wushuang's expectations. Slowly moving forward on this endless red sand wasteland, the silence was at its extreme, and even the breath of half-divided creatures never existed. Be careful! No one has stepped in this 10,000 sky. I don't know what trouble will be waiting for us. Chuanxiu said nervously. Jian Wushuang did not speak. The invisible sword has already appeared in his hand. At the next moment, the boundless red sand wasteland suddenly rushed out several mad sands from the depths of the earth. Like a roaring dragon roaring, the wild sand rushing almost to the sky is rolling over the wind like a knife is raging. Jian Wushuang directly lifted the invisible sword, releasing the vast sword in tension. The unimaginable sword meaning instantly turned into a long river of kendo. Each sword meaning was sparkling and magnificent. Who dares to contend with the sword spirit of Yanxian realm? The river of swordsmanship swept up in the heavens and earth, and directly crushed the 6 giant pillars of red sand into powder, and then sprinted between the heavens and the earth, which almost covered the sky domes. A arrogant boy who dares to pull off the old man's beard. What is the crime? The vast voice resounded like Hongzhong de Lu in this world, and the whole Qisha wasteland began to be restlessly agitated. One side was so huge that it was unimaginable. As the sand and stone fell, it slowly condensed out. Chapter 46:89. The face of spring and autumn has changed greatly, and the supreme breath that has penetrated the world has definitely surpassed the black mountain Yanxian. Instead, Jian Wushuang was very calm, carrying both hands and looking forward. Sword, Brother Xiong, I think we should leave now. afraid it's not something we can deal with. Chunki's voice trembled, and he had already retreated. In his view, leaving does not necessarily mean death, but leaving a certain death on the spot. Even if he believed in Jian Wushuang again, it was difficult to imagine how the realm of Yanli was imprisoned, how to fight the supreme aura at the moment. As the horror winds raged, the entire Qisha wasteland turned into that giant face. Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu stood on the nose of the giant face. The two rounds of dark eyes, like the abyss of the abyss, like the borderless black sea, make people look at it and fall into the abyss. Brother Jian, it's too late to leave. A cold sweat poured from the spring and autumn temples. Jian Wushuang heard the words and looked at him. Don't you want to go back and become a prisoner looking at the Milky Way? Chuanxiu was shocked, and the dark and extreme past came back to his heart. And then his eyes gradually firmed, and he gritted his teeth. Then give it a try. The red sand wasteland is sinking and condensed on the giant surface. Besides standing the sword Wushuang duo, there is another body like a quicksand gathering. It was a figure wearing a splendid emperor's costume. Although the emperor's costume had been damaged, it was still difficult to conceal its prestige. The dry and long hair resembles dry grass, swaying with the wind. The tall and thin old man in the emperor's clothes is bare feet, and he looks like a ruthless emperor. It's just that the tall, thin old man is especially bad-looking. It's the real Wu Yang, Lao Air Under the Dog, who gave you the confidence to disturb the emperor. The side of the spring and autumn whispered carefully to Jian Wushuang Popular Science. The old Wu Yang in his mouth is the emperor of the little emperor. Jian Wushuang nodded slightly, then directly pulled out the invisible sword, and the surging sword swept up. Although he had been promoted to Yanxian, he was firmly suppressed by the chain of imprisonment, but fortunately his swordsmanship was not suppressed. So Jian Wushuang was confident and could fight Yanxian realm. Obviously, this tall and thin old man who claimed to be an emperor had already broken his body, and this is just his real soul right now. If it is really fighting, Jian Wushuang is confident that even if it is difficult to win, he can retreat. I'm sorry, I'm going to completely wipe out the 10,000 eyes today. Jian Wushuang said in a condensed voice. The tall, thin old man narrowed his eyes narrowly. Boy with no hair tied up, dare to speak wildly? Will it be overthrown? But this emperor turn his hands. It is so. No longer ignoring him, Jian Wushuang directly bowed slightly, and a longitudinal sweep raised his invisible sword in his hand and cut him. Chuanxiu also set off at the same time, with a move in both hands and a fate puppet out of the octagonal fuzhua. He ran along. Dare to bully this emperor to death. The tall, thin old man exasperated, nearly 100 red sand giant pillars, rushing from behind him like a meridian deep in the earth's core, stunned Xiang Jian Wushuang. The earthquake shook, and the cracks shattered the sky. Qisha Juju directly wrapped the two of them and began to nibble. The tall, thin old man rose above the sky, sitting on a throne condensed by Qisha, and looked leisurely in front of the battle in the void. Although Jian Wushuang's breath made the tall, thin old man palpitate, he was confident that he was an immortal existence in this red sand world. Even if the real Wu Yang arrived, he would dare to fight 3 points. The red sand giant pillars are intertwined with each other, forming a rounded trend. Jian Wushuang and Chuanxiu are in it, and they can easily feel the rapid disappearance of the diffusivity in the body. At the same time, this red sand is extremely mobile and can easily absorb and wipe out most attacks, which is extremely tricky. Another sword was bombarded, but it only shattered a crack in Qisha and soon disappeared again. Seeing that the siege was getting tighter and tighter, Jian Wushuang no longer hides his clumsiness, stabbing with no fancy sword. Wushuang Kendo, Zingahuhai Jiani first form, star. The sword intention rose into the sky, and Wuxuangbao emerged behind him, turning into the most arrogant sword, straight ahead. Hundreds of swords and swords studded into the sky, bursting out of the red sand. The tall, thin old man sitting on the throne changed, suddenly, and looked down shocked. At the next moment, the most shocking martyr burst under the entire sky dome. Qisha, Lu Yun, and the sky all shattered at this moment. Jian Wushuang closed his sword and stood, looking directly at the sky dome. "Good boy, you succeeded in angering the emperor." Angrily rushed to the crown. The tall, thin old man angrily shattered the throne under him, turned into a thick golden light, and shot toward the sword. Jian Wushuang snorted coldly, suddenly raised his left palm, and faced up without retreating. Chuanxiu was also at this time, tolerating the paralysis of the meridians and releasing the magnificent force. Boom! 3 magnificent collisions of extreme strength directly tore the small world. Jian Wushuang retreated half a step and quickly waved his palms to wipe the dust that filled the sky. Only then did he see the half-shadow of the tall, thin old man on the misty sky. On the side of the spring and autumn, a big spit of smoke and dust spit out, and then watch from the left and right. Human, wouldn't it be taken directly? Actually ran, chasing. Jian Wushuang's eyebrows were startled, and he darted forward and ran forward. Chuanxiu was stunned, and then followed closely. Far away from this small sand world, under the dim sky dome, a slightly embarrassed figure fled into a hurry. It was the tall, thin old man who was full of fan and yelling, "Damn Zhenwu Yang, Lao. This emperor has been dead for so many years, and he didn't plan to let it go. Wait, I will go back to move the rescuers and kill all your dog legs first." Jian Wushuang's speed is extremely fast. Almost every breath, it can cross a world of hundreds of millions of miles. This is due to the fact that he first strayed into Dianhuan and laid down a kind of magical power that he had realized for 500,000 years, named Shanhainian. Wherever the heart thinks, mountains and rivers come. Moreover, the power consumption of this little supernatural power is almost negligible, and the current situation has become an important method of swordsmanship. With the blessing of mountains and rivers, almost in a few moments, he approached the tall and thin old man who was still fleeing in embarrassment. In the spring and autumn, Jian Wushuang's figure was also invisible. Perceiving the sudden burst of air behind him, the tall, thin old man looked back subconsciously, and at this glance, the suddenly scared spirits were scattered. Jian Wushuang didn't know, when he had followed, the sharp invisible sword in his hand was almost going to be cut. Chapter 4690. Taking a deep breath, the tall and thin old man who dare not stop in one step did not forget to turn around and shout, "Shuzi, I advise you to return at a fast speed. Before you acted offensively, the emperor will not blame it. Otherwise, the iron fist of this emperor is not something you can afford to wait for." Why is this guy so long-winded? Jian Wushuang was a little speechless. He used to see too many disagreements drawing swords and chopping off each other. In the face of such a kind old man, he didn't know how to shoot. Judging from the trouble in the mouth of the little emperor, this entire Wanmushan should be to clear the true soul of these emperors. Jian Wushuang has never been an indecisive person. He has too much to do to enter Dianhuan, and he can never be imprisoned in Montenegro. No longer hesitating, Jian Wushuang directly aimed at the tall and thin old man, striking down sharply and sharply. The tall, thin old man was startled, almost instinctively sideways, able to escape the horrific blow. So far, the two are chasing each other in this world. Rao is a tall and thin old man who is only in the form of a soul, but his strength is at its highest, and Jian Wushuang can't help him for a while. However, the chaos all happened to kill the master. Jian Wushuang waved a sword dance behind him. One of the swords was poking at the old man's. but making him scream like a plucking pig. Shuzi, dare to sneak attack on this emperor, and in the future you will be called upon by your soul to be lashed out. The tall, thin old man couldn't care about covering the injured part and turned his head to say cruelly, Jian Wushuang was helpless, and at the same time he began to doubt deeply whether this narrative-like nag was really an emperor. Another round of confrontation. The invisible sword made several wounds on the tall and thin old man, and he cursed again and again when he hurt. Jian Wushuang ignored him and was determined to wipe out all eyes. Perhaps he knew that the general trend was gone, and he could not escape. The tall, thin old man simply stayed in place, looking like he was going to kill him. Under this unexpected situation, Jian Wushuang almost stabbed in the past. The tall, thin old man carried his hands on his back and laughed aloud. Good boy, this emperor is the of death today, and I want to ask you to bring a sentence to that real Wuyang old man. You just say, Yang Jun has regrets, his biggest regret, I just couldn't see you wearing filial piety and filial piety as the last filial son. Jian Wushuang is full of black lines. Come on, kill Ben Emperor, and go back to his life. The tall, thin old man spread his arms. There was a moment of hesitation flashing in Jian Wushuang's eyes, and the invisible long sword he raised was put down again. Judging from the performance of this tall and thin old man, he is not a man of great evil, but has a real temperament. Compared with the boy and girl, the little emperor with a gloomy face, it is more like a good person. There was a moment of silence between heaven and earth, and a tall, thin old man with a deadly expression didn't wait for a blow. Do you have any way to hide the breath, or leave here and never step here? Jian Wushuang retracted the long sword and said, quietly. The tall, thin old man was stunned. Apparently he hadn't responded. Aren't you killing me? Too lazy to kill. Jian Wushuang said concisely. The expression of the tall and thin old man became wonderful immediately. Good boy, I said you are righteous. How can you be with shameless people such as Zhenwu Yang Lao Er? The emperor really read right. Don't disturb. Say the right thing. Leave here. Jian Wushuang said helplessly. The tall, thin old man scratched his head, his face awkward. At the next moment, the sky and earth suddenly changed color, and the clouds seemed to roll up and down the sea of sea, surging and changing. Who dares to break into Wanmushan? The low-pitched voice with supreme power resounded through the world, rushing across. Even Jian Wushuang's calm heart trembled. The tall, thin old man was so impatient when he saw such a changing scene. This old thing, every time it is played, is like a big show, and it is very cheap. Immediately afterwards, an old man with supreme prestige came to the wind, also wearing the imperial clothes, although the same was broken, but it was difficult to hide the power of terror. The eyes are far away from each other. Jian Wushuang runs Yanli almost the first time, but the tall, thin old man was very calm, and he raised his head and drank directly. Old Daogong, come down quickly and pick up the guests. Jian Wushuang is full of black lines. Old things just crying and crying for help. Now you are backed by your father, and you're stiff. The old man, who was still holding a shelf in the cloud, heard the words and rushed down with his sleeves in his hands. The tall, thin old man pouted, very skillfully avoided a kick, and said, The old thing has a shape right away. It's about the three of us. The old man of Wei heard that. As if nothing had happened, he rolled down his sleeves and watched Jian Wushuang vigilantly. Lao, Sen Liang asked you to persuade? Wrong. This kid must not deal with Zhenwu Yang. The tall and thin old man reminded timely, Then what are you doing here? Elder Wei looked at Jian Wushuang again. It's about myself, and I have to come to clear these 10,000 eyes. Jian Wushuang said, I don't want to create a killing industry for no reason, so I want to invite the two to leave here And don't step here. As Jian Wushuang's voice fell, an angry voice rang out from the sky, speaking loudly, "Ignorant child." This time did not wait for Jian Wushuang to react. The tall and thin old man and the old man of Wei shot at the same time, and the two forces rushed directly to the cloud, so that the voice disappeared directly. "What is your relationship with Zhenwing?" Wei old man asked. Jian Wushuang directly said, "I don't know any true Wuyang. The reason why I came to clean up is just to be helpless." "What if we don't leave?" "Then I can only clear this place." Jian Wushuang said slowly. The elder Wei smiled angrily, his strength condensed into substance and turned into hundreds of pointed cones, pointing at him. "It's up to you. Don't you plan to pray for some survival?" "There is something to discuss. Too brutal to use brute force," said the tall, thin old man. Then he looked at Jian Wushuang. There was some embarrassment in his eyes. "It's not that we don't want to leave, but this is beyond the realm of sight, and it is all in the realm of Zhenwuyang Lauer. I found out that the three of us had to dissipate the true soul. Therefore, we can't get out of this million eyes, and we can't go back." Jian Wushuang frowned slightly. "And they would NT leave if they did NT leave, and it would NT be possible to let the little emperor let him go." Just between these hesitations, the sound of breaking air sounded behind him, and some breathless spring and autumn flew by. "Brother Jian, you are here, let me find it." The tall and thin old man's nose flicked slightly, looking at Chunxia with some doubts. "Area of treasure?" "Spring and autumn are unknown, but they are alert. How can this boy smell like a bowl of yang?" The tall, thin old man whispered,